I remember the exact temperature of the air that afternoon at Fort Liberty, North Carolina. It was early April 2024, the kind of day when the humidity presses against your skin before the sun even decides what it wants to do. I had just finished a long shift at the Battalion S4 shop, still wearing half of my uniform boots, dusty from inspections along the motor pool. All I wanted was to pick up my daughter Lily from my mother's house and take her home for dinner. That was the only plan. Nothing complicated, nothing emotional, nothing dangerous. But danger was already waiting for me behind the barracks line, disguised as a family gathering. My mother, Sandra, had called 3 times that morning. Each voicemail had the same tone she had perfected my entire life. "You never show up. You always act like the Army is more important than family. Do not embarrass us today." I ignored the guilt in her voice because I had learned to. Yet after a 12-hour shift and a quick glance at Lily's pink backpack in my passenger seat, I told myself it was fine. 1 hour at a backyard-style barbecue near the old on-base housing area. 1 hour. I parked and heard laughter, but not the light kind. The sharp kind. The kind that always came before something went wrong. My stepfather, Mark Ellison, was standing near a folding table, beer in hand, stomach pressing against his faded work shirt. He was not in the Army, never had been, but he spent most of his life pretending he understood discipline better than people who actually wore the uniform. Next to him was Brianna, my 19-year-old stepsister, leaning against the wooden railing with her arms crossed like she was overseeing a reality show scene. She wore smugness like makeup. Lily saw me and ran toward me, her little legs bouncing in her light-up sneakers, but before she reached me, she slowed down and looked behind her. Brianna had said something to her. I could see it in this quick drop of Lily's smile. I asked what happened, and Lily whispered later. Mark grinned and nodded at me. "Captain Hale graces us with her presence." He always said my rank like it was a joke. My mother appeared from the back porch holding a tray of burgers and sighed loud enough for everyone to hear. "You look tired. Maybe if you did not work yourself into the ground, you would look more like a mother and less like a soldier." I kissed Lily on the head and told her to go play near the picnic table. She wandered off quiet, anxious, scanning for a safe spot. But her safe spot did not exist here. Only minutes passed before she drifted toward the drainage canal behind the barracks, a place where water had pooled deeper because of heavy rain the previous week. I watched her, but in the middle of turning to put my jacket down, Brianna's voice cut through the air. "Your kid cannot even climb the tire obstacle." Pathetic. I felt my jaw tighten. I reminded myself to stay calm. My mother added her favorite insult. "Being in the Army made you aggressive. That is why Lily is always jumpy." Mark snorted and muttered loud enough for me to hear. "Weakness comes from the mother." I turned back toward Lily just in time to see Brianna step behind her and shove her. My vision exploded. 1 second, Lily stood on the edge. The next, she vanished beneath the surface of the dark water. Fully clothed. 6 years old. Small. Terrified. My body reacted before my mind could. I sprinted. Every memory of casualty drills, every instinct from deployment, every maternal reflex fired at once. But before I could reach the water, something tightened around my collar and upper chest. Mark. His arm clamped around me and yanked me backward. Hard. My boots slid across mud. I lost balance. His breath hit my ear as he growled his twisted sentence. "If she is weak, she does not survive. Life is simple." Lily surfaced for a moment, eyes wide mouth open, tiny fingers clawing at the water before she slipped under again. I screamed her name, but Mark's grip crushed my voice, crushed the air, crushed everything. I fought him with everything I had. I kicked back. My heel slammed into his leg. He stumbled. His grip loosened just enough for me to tear myself free. Brianna watched everything with her arms folded as if it was entertainment. She said the words that burned themselves into my memory. "If she cannot swim, she is weak anyway." I reached the water and dove in. The cold shocked my body, but I kept moving. I reached Lily as she sank again, her hair drifting like ink, her eyes fading. I grabbed her, pulled her against my chest, and kicked upward. When we reached the surface, she was not breathing right. Small sounds, water from her lips, her face pale, her body limp. I pulled her to the bank and held her. My hands shook so hard I could barely keep her upright. I looked at Mark, at Brianna, at my mother. None of them moved. None of them cared. And something in me shifted forever. I was done surviving them. Now they would face consequences. If you were in my boots, what would you do in that moment? Most people assume strength is something you are born with, but the truth is that mine was built one survival skill at a time, long before the Army ever gave me a uniform. I was 12 when my mother married Mark Ellison, a man who walked into our lives acting as if he had been forged in some heroic tradition, even though he had never served a single day in the military. He called everything discipline, but there was nothing disciplined about the way he ruled the house. He liked order when it applied to everyone but himself. He liked rules when they held other people down. He liked power most of all. I used to count the tiles on my bedroom ceiling at night, telling myself that if I could make it to 18, I could leave. Back then, I knew more about fear than structure. Mom ignored everything because she liked having a man who looked decisive, even if the decisions were harmful. She said marriage took compromise and that I needed to learn respect. She meant I needed to obey Mark. He treated Brianna, who was only 2 years younger than me, like she was royalty. She was never at fault, never responsible, never held to the same standard. I was the one who got lectured for not saying sir, or who got grounded for chores done imperfectly. Brianna got new clothes and excuses. I got silence or blame. That imbalance was the beginning of my education, the kind you do not ask for, the kind that makes you older inside than you should be. When I turned 14, Mark introduced his version of military-style discipline. He made me stand against the wall for long periods because I rolled my eyes. He made me scrub floors because I questioned him. He yelled about structure and obedience, but he never talked about compassion or integrity or any of the things real soldiers value. I could not wait to get out. High school became my countdown clock. I did not join clubs or sports. I worked part-time at a grocery store to save money. Every dollar in that jar felt like hope. The day I turned 19, I enlisted in the United States Army. I knew nothing about the world, but I knew I wanted structure that had purpose instead of punishment. I wanted rules that protected people, not rules used as weapons. I wanted to build a life where my worth did not depend on surviving someone else's temper. Leaving home felt like stepping into sunlight for the first time. Basic training at Fort Moore hit me like a shock, but a good one. For once, the yelling had intention. For once, the discipline had meaning. When I struggled with the ruck march, my drill sergeant did not mock me. He showed me how to distribute weight. When I hesitated on the confidence tower, he did not roll his eyes. He explained risk and safety. That consistency made me cry in private sometimes because it was the first time in my life authority felt safe. AIT at Fort Gregg Adams gave me my foundation in logistics. I thrived because hard work made sense to me. For the first time, effort equaled results instead of punishment. I studied late. I volunteered for everything. I kept pushing because the Army gave me something I never had before. Predictability. A chance to rise based on performance, not favoritism. I applied to become an officer candidate after 2 years of enlisted service, and when I was selected, it felt like my life finally had direction that belonged to me. I commissioned as a second lieutenant at 23. I still remember Mark's mocking comment when my mother told him. He said, "Not everyone with bars on their chest deserves them." I learned that jealousy sounds loudest from the people who do the least. My first duty station overseas was in South Korea. The rotation was demanding but professional. I met Lily's father there, another service member. We were young. We were lonely. We mistook each other's company for stability. When I found out I was pregnant, he panicked. A month later, he requested reassignment and left before Lily was even born. I decided to raise her alone. I had survived much worse than single motherhood. I knew I could protect her from everything life had thrown at me. But the moment Lily arrived, the stakes changed. I was no longer surviving for myself. I was building something bigger, something that deserved safety and tenderness and truth. When I returned to the States with Lily after the rotation ended, my family reacted exactly how I expected. My mother lectured me about responsibility. Mark said women in uniform always struggled with family life. Brianna laughed every time Lily cried as a baby and said she was dramatic just like her mother. They called me a single mother officer like it was a warning label. They whispered that I was a bad example, but I had rank, I had purpose, I had a daughter who depended on me, and the Army gave me stability they could never understand. The more I succeeded, the more they resented it. The better Lily behaved, the more they tried to pick her apart. Looking back, I can see exactly why they grew bitter. I had escaped the environment they tried to keep me trapped in. I had become everything they said I could not. I built a career based on structure instead of fear. I earned respect instead of demanding it. And because they could not control me anymore, they tried to undermine me by targeting the one thing that mattered most. Lily. I thought distance would keep us safe. I thought time would dull their cruelty. But the day behind the barracks proved me wrong. Their resentment had not faded. It had escalated into something far more dangerous. They did not just want to make me small. They were willing to hurt my daughter to do it. And in that moment, I understood something about myself that I had long forgotten. Survival was no longer enough. Now it had to be justice. If people looked at my family from the outside, they would have seen a normal household with weekend cookouts and polite greetings, but anyone who stepped closer would have heard the cracks in every conversation. The weeks leading up to the incident behind the barracks were not an explosion out of nowhere. They were a slow buildup of comments, looks, and moments designed to push Lily and me back into the old role we were supposed to play. Brianna had developed a habit of hovering near Lily whenever we visited. She did not push or shout at first. She simply used subtle intimidation. She would stand too close. She would block Lily's path in the hallway. She would say small things under her breath like, "Are you scared again?" or "You cry too easily." Lily never told me directly, but I saw how she shrank around Brianna. You can tell when a child is uncomfortable. It is in the way they hold their shoulders slightly higher, as if bracing for something. The first time I confronted Brianna, she shrugged. "I am not doing anything. Maybe she is just too sensitive." My mother immediately sided with her. "Rowan, you always assume the worst. Being in the Army made you jumpy and aggressive. That is probably why Lily acts scared." That sentence became her favorite weapon. Any concern I raised was dismissed as military training making me paranoid. If Lily hesitated near the stairs, it was because Rowan scares her. If Lily flinched when Mark raised his voice, it was because Rowan is dramatic. Gaslighting was the default language in that house. But the comments escalated. Mark started making remarks about Lily's posture or her grip on a cup or her running speed. He would look at her as if she were a defective recruit. One afternoon, Lily dropped a spoon, and Mark murmured, "Looks weak." Not even trying to hide it. I told him not to talk about my daughter that way. He raised his eyebrows like I had overreacted. "I am just saying she needs confidence. Maybe if you let her struggle more, she would learn." I knew the tone. I grew up with it. A small comment shaped like advice but sharpened to injure. I tried to step back. I limited visits. I kept conversations short. But every time I pulled away, my mother's voice followed me like a chain. "You are always distant. You think your rank makes you superior. You forget family when you wear that uniform." She said things like that for years. They used the word family as if it excused everything else. No matter how many times they hurt me or belittled my daughter the moment I tried to protect myself, I became the villain. She even added guilt that sounded almost practiced. "People at church ask about you. They think you are too good to be part of this family now. Do not embarrass us. You should show your face. Bring Lily. Let them see you are still part of us." My mother mastered guilt the way some people master piano. It was her instrument. I knew I should have refused. I knew distancing was the right choice. But the guilt was familiar, old, heavy. It echoed every childhood memory. At the same time, I felt tired. Tired of tension, tired of the uneasy peace, tired of trying to keep Lily away from every sharp edge they created. When she begged to see her grandmother, I let myself believe maybe it would be different for her. Maybe they could show her a version of themselves they never gave me, but they did not. The week before everything happened, Brianna cornered Lily near the backyard while I was helping my mother clean up after lunch. When I walked out, I found Lily standing rigid as Brianna leaned over her. All I heard Brianna say was, "Why do you shake so much?" My mother saw it and did nothing. She folded napkins and hummed as if nothing was happening 2 feet away. I told Lily to come with me. Brianna rolled her eyes. You spoil her. That is why she is like that. On the drive home, Lily asked me softly if she could stay away from Brianna. She did not say scared. She said uncomfortable. Children choose their words carefully when they are trying not to upset you. That night, I lay in bed thinking about everything. I told myself we would take a break from visiting. I told myself I would set boundaries. But the next morning, my mother called again with her same lines. Do not make things dramatic. People notice when you do not come around. Lily should know her family. You should not isolate her. I held the phone and listened to the old rhythm of accusation and expectation. The sad truth was that part of me still wanted my mother to be someone she had never been, someone who cared, someone who protected, someone who chose me. The guilt she used was powerful because it came from a place that had never healed, and so when she insisted we come to the small cookout behind the barracks area, I convinced myself it was harmless. I convinced myself I could control the environment. The barracks were familiar ground. MPs patrolled the area. Soldiers were always around. It felt safer than their old house. I had no idea how wrong I was. The final warning sign came the moment we arrived that day. Lily hesitated to get out of the car. She clutched her little unicorn keychain and whispered, "Can we go home after lunch?" "Of course, sweetheart," I told her. "We will not stay long." She nodded, but her eyes kept scanning the area the same way mine used to when I was her age, walking into a room Mark controlled. I saw the echoes. I ignored them. Because guilt, hope, and exhaustion create a toxic mix that makes you override your instincts. The insults, the gaslighting, the humiliation, the way they spoke to Lily, all of it was building pressure in a sealed room. And I was the one holding the door shut, hoping nothing would escape. But pressure does not disappear because you pretend it is harmless. It waits. It grows. It finds a crack. And that crack would open behind the barracks in the most terrifying way possible. When I pulled Lily out of the water, her body felt heavier than it should have. Water streamed from her hair, and her clothes clung to her small frame. She was coughing, but not enough. Her breaths were too shallow, and every sound she made sent a new spike of panic through my chest. I held her close and tried to keep my hands steady enough to check her airway, the same way I had done 100 times in training. But this was not a simulation. This was my child. I fumbled for my phone and called 911. My voice cracked when I said my location behind the barracks, but I forced myself to stay clear because panic wastes time. The operator asked if Lily was breathing. I answered yes, but not well. They told me to keep her warm and turned their tone gentle, like they did not want me breaking apart before help arrived. I focused on Lily. I rubbed her back and spoke softly, even though my heart was shaking. "You are right here, baby. Stay with me. You are safe." She blinked slowly, but her eyes did not focus, and that terrified me more than anything Mark had done. In the distance, I heard the approaching siren before I saw the ambulance make the turn into the narrow service road. 2 paramedics ran toward us carrying equipment. One knelt beside Lily and checked her pulse, while the other asked me what had happened. I told them the truth in a tight voice. She was pushed into the water. I reached her as fast as I could. The paramedic nodded and kept his questions clinical. How long was she submerged? Was she conscious when I got her out? Did she vomit any water? Their movements were steady, professional. They lifted Lily onto a stretcher and covered her with a warming blanket. One of them looked at me with a seriousness that sank into my bones. "There is risk of hypothermia. She has likely aspirated water. We need to monitor her breathing closely." They guided me into the ambulance with them. I sat beside Lily and held her hand as the doors shut. Everything outside blurred behind us as we sped toward Womack Army Medical Center. Inside the ambulance, the paramedic kept checking Lily's vitals while the other relayed information to the hospital. I listened to every number he said and prayed silently for each one to improve. Lily's eyelids fluttered, but she still looked dazed. I stroked her hair and kept telling her I was with her because I needed her to hear my voice more than anything else. When we reached Womack, the ER doors opened before the vehicle stopped moving. A team of nurses and a pediatric specialist were waiting. They transferred Lily gently and moved her onto a hospital bed. I followed them closely until a nurse placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ma'am, we need some space to work. Stay right here." She pointed me to a small corner where I could still see Lily but not interfere. Watching people hover over my daughter as they checked her breathing and monitored her oxygen levels made my stomach twist. A nurse wrapped another warming blanket around Lily, and another started checking her lungs for abnormal sounds. Someone else connected a monitor to track her vitals. The atmosphere was calm but focused, and that calmness made the fear inside me rise because I could read the unspoken cues. They were worried. While they worked, a nurse approached me and asked for details. Her tone was soft but intentional. Was Lily running near water? Did she fall? Did someone see what happened? I met her eyes and answered in clear, even sentences. She did not fall. She was pushed. My stepfather held me back when I tried to get to her. My stepsister watched. The nurse held my gaze for a moment longer than necessary. She had seen enough to recognize when a story carried danger under its surface. She nodded once and wrote everything down. She did not say the words child endangerment, but her expression told me she was thinking it. Minutes later, an ER doctor approached. He asked me to walk him through the entire incident. His voice was calm, but the questions he asked cut straight through the lies my family used to hide behind. Who pushed her? Who restrained you? Did this happen on base housing property? Has this kind of behavior happened before? Do you feel safe? Every question peeled another layer off the story until all that was left was the truth. I told him what happened in short, clear answers. Lily was pushed. I was held back. It was intentional. I wanted every detail on record because silence only protects the wrong people. The doctor wrote everything down and instructed the staff to document Lily's bruising from where Mark had grabbed me as well. He said aspirating water can cause complications and they needed to keep Lily for observation. Hearing him say the word complications made my knees weak. A nurse placed a chair beside Lily's bed and told me to sit next to her. I did not want to sit. I felt like if I let myself stop moving, the fear would crush me. But I sat anyway and held Lily's hand gently. She stirred and whispered, "Mama." That single word made everything inside me break and reform at the same time. While I was sitting there watching her breathe as monitors beeped around us, two military police officers stepped into the room. Their presence was quiet and controlled. One of them asked if I was Captain Rowan Hale. I nodded. "We need a statement, ma'am. We were informed this incident might involve harm to a child on federal property." Their phrasing was careful, but the meaning was unmistakable. This was no longer a family issue. This was an official case. I told them what happened with the same clarity I gave the doctor. No hesitation, no softening. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of truth lifting off my chest instead of burying me. When the MPs finished their notes, they looked at Lily for a moment, then at me. "We will file this immediately, ma'am. Someone will follow up." As they walked out, I looked back at my daughter lying there with wires and blankets and soft breaths. All I knew was that the people who caused this were still out there acting like nothing had happened, and as I sat beside her, I realized the fear I had lived with my entire life had turned into something sharper, something focused, something that would not allow them to hurt her again. Not ever. I do not know how long I sat there beside Lily's hospital bed listening to the steady rhythm of the monitor. Every beep felt like a reminder that she was alive, and every breath she took felt like a warning of how close she had come to not being. The military police officers returned after speaking with the ER physician. Their tone was even more formal now. "Captain Hale, we are opening an official case regarding child endangerment on federal property. We need more detail for the initial report." I nodded because any movement that moved us toward protection was a relief. They recorded everything: where I was standing when Brianna pushed Lily, how Mark held me back, how long Lily was submerged, whether Brianna or Mark showed any attempt to help. I told them the truth again in clipped sentences. Brianna pushed her. Mark restrained me. They watched. They did nothing. The officer paused for a moment before writing down those last 3 words. It was a simple detail, but it carried weight because in cases like this, inaction speaks as loudly as intent. After they finished documenting the incident, they told me the next steps. Ma'am, because a minor was endangered on federal land, we are required to notify Child Protective Services of Cumberland County. They will send a caseworker shortly. They will likely want to talk to you and examine any history related to this event. I nodded again. There was nothing in me left to hide. I had spent my entire childhood shielding people who did not deserve protection. But Lily deserved every layer I could give her. When the MPs left the room, I watched Lily sleep. Her breathing was more stable now, but her body shivered slightly under the blankets. I tucked the edges closer around her. In all my years wearing a uniform, I had never felt so helpless and so furious at the same time. That combination sharpened into resolve. The door opened again about an hour later. A woman stepped inside, wearing business casual clothes and a badge on a lanyard. She had calm eyes and a steady posture. Captain Hale, I am Maria Torres with Cumberland County Child Protective Services. I am here regarding the incident that occurred earlier today. Her voice was steady the way people speak when they have seen terrible things often enough to know how to stay grounded. She sat beside me and opened a notebook. I need to ask some difficult questions about your family history and any prior incidents. I answered everything. I did not sugarcoat anything. I told her about Mark's control, his habit of treating discipline like punishment, his mocking comments about Lily, the way Brianna hovered over my daughter and made her feel unsafe. And I told her what happened today in full detail. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked quietly, "Has there been a pattern of emotional harm or intimidation toward your daughter before today?" I said yes. Then I opened my phone. My hands shook slightly, but I opened the folder I had avoided for years, the one labeled Evidence. I handed her photos of bruises Mark had left on me when I was a teenager. Images I kept not for revenge, but as reminders that I survived. I showed her text messages from my mother accusing me of being dramatic whenever I tried to set boundaries. I played the audio file of Brianna laughing at Lily 2 months ago, calling her scared of everything and weak like her mother. Maria did not react with shock because I suspect she had seen families hide cruelty behind yard decorations and Sunday worship more times than she could count. But she did react with something else. Clarity. She wrote everything down, then closed her notebook and said the sentence that made the air in the room shift. "We will create a safety plan immediately." It was the first time anyone in authority had ever said those words on my behalf. She explained the steps. CPS would mark the case as active within the hour. There would be supervised visitation only until the investigation concluded. Mark and Brianna would not be allowed near Lily without oversight. The school would be notified to place a confidential code in Lily's file so she could not be signed out by anyone but me. A temporary no-contact recommendation would be issued until the court reviewed the case. While she spoke, I felt tension unwind from a place inside me I had not realized was clenched. She asked if I felt safe returning to my current residence. I said yes because my home on base was secure, but I wanted additional measures. She said she would coordinate with the MPs to place a flag on my address so that if Mark or Brianna attempted to enter base housing without authorization, security would respond immediately. She asked if I had support. I said my unit was strong and my commander trustworthy. She nodded as if that mattered to her. It probably did. Not everyone has a unit to fall back on. When Maria finished outlining the plan, she surprised me by placing a gentle hand on my arm. "You did the right thing today. You protected your child and yourself. Most people take years to gather the strength to speak up." Her voice softened even more. "This does not reflect on you as a parent. What happened reflects on them." She left to coordinate the next steps. I watched her walk down the hall and realized that for the first time since I was 12 years old, I was not alone in dealing with my family. Not legally, not emotionally, not structurally. There were people whose job was to stop the cycle I had been trapped in for decades. I sat beside Lily again and brushed damp hair from her forehead. Her breathing was steadier now, stronger. She whispered Mama in her sleep, and the sound was soft but full of life. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what it took, I would make sure the people who hurt her could never reach her again. Not physically, not emotionally, not ever. The morning after the incident felt unreal, not because things were calmer, but because every minute carried a new weight. Lily was still at Womack for observation. She slept curled against my side, exhausted, her little fingers wrapped around mine, as if she knew that letting go was no longer an option. When the pediatric doctor cleared her to go home under strict monitoring, I felt relief but also fear. Home was safe, but the world outside the hospital had not changed. The people who hurt her were still moving freely. That was not acceptable. Before leaving the hospital, I called Poole Elementary School, the on-base school where Lily studied. The front office secretary recognized my name immediately because Army bases function like small towns. "Captain Hale, are you all right? We heard something happened near the barracks." I swallowed the tightness in my throat and said, "I need to put a restriction on my daughter's file immediately." The tone on the other end shifted from friendly to professional in an instant. "Yes, ma'am. What type of restriction?" I said the words that had been echoing in my head since last night. "No release without mother." They understood at once. On-base schools are trained for these situations. The secretary asked for details and then transferred me to the assistant principal who oversaw student safety protocols. He said they would create a confidential code attached to Lily's file so staff would know not to release her to anyone, even if that person claimed to be family. He also said teachers and office staff would be briefed discreetly. When he finished listing the steps, I felt something shift inside me again, different from rage or fear. Structure, stability, a system finally working in our favor. After the call, I drove back to my on-base housing, the small 2-bedroom unit I had worked so hard to make peaceful. But stepping into the house felt different now. The living room looked the same. The kitchen looked the same. Lily's toys were exactly where she left them. Yet everything suddenly felt too exposed, too accessible, too vulnerable. I put Lily on the couch under a warm blanket and turned on her favorite cartoons. Then I pulled out my phone and called installation security. "This is Captain Rowan Hale. I need to request a residence flag on my address." The sergeant on duty asked why. I explained the basics without giving every detail. "A family member who lives off base attempted to interfere with my ability to protect my child. I have a CPS case open and an MP report filed." He did not hesitate. "Yes, ma'am. We will place a flag on your housing unit. Anyone attempting to enter without authorization will be stopped and questioned. If they match the names you provide, they will be denied access." I gave him the names. Saying them out loud felt like closing a door. When I hung up, I stood still for a moment. My home felt safer already. But I was not finished, not even close. I changed the locks that afternoon. Maintenance came out because military housing allows lock changes when there is a safety concern. I watched them install new hardware on my front door and back door while Lily napped on the couch. Next, I bought a new phone and transferred my information. Mark had my old number. So did Brianna. So did my mother. I did not want a single one of them calling or texting or pretending they deserved access to us. The final step was installing Ring cameras. One at the front door, one at the back, one facing the parking area. The moment I connected the feed and saw the live view of my doorstep, something inside me steadied. All my life I had lived in houses where doors were never real boundaries. Now the boundaries were mine to set and enforce. While I worked, the phone buzzed. It was a message from Poole Elementary confirming everything. "Lily's file has been updated. Confidential code active. No release without mother order registered. Teachers notified. If anyone attempts to pick her up without authorization, the school will contact military police immediately." Thank you, Captain Hale. Reading those words almost made my eyes sting. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that an entire network of adults was now aligned to protect my child instead of questioning me. The installation security office called an hour later. "Ma'am, the flag on your residence is active. If Mark Ellison or Brianna Ellison attempts to enter Fort Liberty property, they will be stopped. If they attempt to reach your housing area, we will dispatch patrol." The precision of the system felt like armor wrapping around us. Every measure reduced the fear inch by inch. That evening, Lily woke from her nap and sat quietly beside me on the couch. She leaned against my arm and whispered, "Mama, are we safe here?" I smoothed her hair back and told her the truth. "Yes, we are safe, and I am making sure we stay that way." She nodded and rested her head on my shoulder. For a moment, the house felt peaceful again. A fragile piece, but real. That night, as she slept in her room, I walked through the house slowly. I checked each lock twice. I watched the Ring camera feed more times than necessary. Not because I was expecting someone to show up, but because I needed to see for myself that nothing moved beyond the borders I had set. In the Army, we talk about layered security, defense in depth, multiple systems working together to create protection strong enough to withstand threats. For the first time in my civilian life, I had that at home. A flagged residence, a school with protocols, a new phone number, new locks, surveillance, CPS involvement, MP investigation, all of it forming a shield. And beneath that shield was my daughter breathing softly in her pink pajamas as if the world had not tried to take her from me less than 24 hours earlier. I stood in her doorway and watched her sleep. The weight of everything settled in my chest. The danger was not gone, but the balance of power had shifted. For the first time, my family would face a system bigger than their cruelty. And for the first time, I had the tools to dismantle every remaining path they could use to reach us. I turned off the hallway light and whispered a silent promise that they would never get another chance. 2 days after the incident, I woke up feeling the kind of heaviness that settles into your ribs and refuses to leave. Lily was home from the hospital and finally sleeping through the night again, but every time I looked at her, I still saw her small body sinking beneath the dark water. I knew protecting her physically was only the first layer. There were social layers too, places where my family held influence, places where they had told their story first for years. One of those places was the little church in Spring Lake. It was a small beige building near the main road with a narrow parking lot and a modest sign that always displayed verses chosen by volunteers. My mother and Mark had gone there for nearly a decade. It was their social stage. It was where they acted like leaders, helpers, good people. And it was where most people believed them. I had stopped going years ago because the sermons were never the problem. The people were. They mirrored whatever version of my family was presented to them. They learned to smile at me politely but dismissively because they only heard the side that made my mother sound saintly and made me sound distant. That distance had been intentional. But after what happened behind the barracks, I realized silence only protected them. So that Sunday morning, I dressed Lily in something comfortable and drove to the church. She held a small stuffed dinosaur in her hand and looked out the window quietly as we approached. "Mama, are we going to see Grandma?" "No, sweetheart," I said. "We are going to talk to someone who needs to know the truth so he can help keep us safe." Pastor Grant stood near the front steps greeting people as they arrived. He was in his late 50s, calm voice, warm eyes, and the kind of presence that made people feel grounded. He knew my family well, but he also knew enough about military communities to recognize when something was wrong beneath the surface. When he saw me, he paused and his expression shifted subtly. "Captain Hale, we have not seen you in a while. Is everything all right?" I did not answer that question because the answer was too big to speak casually. Instead, I asked if we could talk privately. He nodded immediately and led us to a small office near the back hallway. He pulled a chair close for Lily and handed her some colored pencils from a drawer. Then he sat across from me, hands folded gently, and waited. I told him everything, not dramatically, not emotionally, just plainly. Brianna shoved Lily into the water. Mark held me back. Neither of them helped. My mother watched and did nothing. He did not interrupt once. His face grew still, not shocked, but deeply disturbed. When I finished, he let out a slow breath. "Rowan, I had no idea. Most people did not. My family had always been skilled at shaping their reputation within the church. They volunteered at events, donated time, helped with holiday decorations, and filled every silence with their own version of our history. But Pastor Grant was not interested in versions. He leaned forward and said, "Thank you for telling me. I am very sorry this happened, and even sorrier that you carried this alone for so long." I nodded because there was nothing else to say. He asked what steps I had already taken, and I explained the CPS involvement, the MP report, the no-release order at Lily's school, the flagged address on base. He nodded with approval at each one. "You have done everything right. Now we will do our part." I asked softly, "What does that mean?" He closed his notebook and spoke with the quiet firmness of someone who knew exactly how to navigate difficult truths. The church cannot ignore behavior that endangers a child. We will remove Mark and Brianna from all volunteer roles effective immediately. There will be no announcement, no confrontation, but they will no longer have access to positions that give them influence over families or children. I felt a strange sensation then. Not triumph, not relief. Something steadier. Accountability. Real accountability. Spring Lake was small. Word traveled fast in ways that did not look dramatic from the outside but carried weight. When volunteers disappear from rosters, people notice. When someone is suddenly not scheduled to help with youth events, people whisper. When leadership roles shift quietly, it sends a message louder than any public accusation. I thanked him and he shook his head gently. You do not owe me thanks. Protecting the vulnerable is part of our responsibility. Please, let me know if you need anything. As Lily and I walked out of the church, I could already feel eyes on us from across the parking lot. Curious, hesitant. Something had shifted in the dynamic, and people sensed it even if they did not know why yet. Over the next 48 hours, the community pressure began to build. A neighbor of my mother's who once complimented Mark's discipline style now avoided eye contact when he saw him take out the trash. A woman from the church who used to gossip with my mother about me called to ask if Lily was doing all right, but did not ask to speak to my mother. Another family in the congregation quietly removed Mark from a group message for volunteers. None of it was loud, none of it was public, but all of it was real. The world they used to control began shrinking. Their circle began closing. Doors that once opened easily for them no longer did. And all of it happened without me raising my voice or making a post or confronting them in public. It was not revenge. It was consequence. Consequence delivered by a community that finally saw what lay beneath the surface. One evening, I checked my Ring camera just to reassure myself and noticed something subtle. My mother's car drove past my street but did not stop. She slowed down for a moment, then kept going. Maybe she finally understood she had lost the place she held in my life. Or maybe she sensed the shift in the community and did not know how to navigate it. Either way, it did not matter. For the first time in my life, I realized I did not need their approval or their excuses. I had truth. I had structure. I had a community that valued safety over image. And most importantly, I had my daughter sleeping peacefully in her room because the world around us was finally beginning to protect her instead of harm her. 3 days after the incident behind the barracks, I sat in my kitchen staring at a folder I had avoided creating for most of my life. It sat on the table like a weight thick with documents that should never have existed. Medical records, CPS notes, MP case numbers, photos of the water pit, screenshots, audio files. Proof from years I tried to forget. All of it was now evidence. Evidence that the people who called themselves my family had crossed a line no amount of apology or denial could erase. I called the judge advocate office first. The military legal system could not prosecute civilians like Mark or Brianna, but they could advise me, guide me, and ensure I understood every option available. When I arrived, a captain from JAG reviewed the MP report carefully. His expression remained steady but serious as he closed the file and looked at me. Captain Hale, you have enough here to secure strong protective measures. However, for anything beyond on-base jurisdiction, you will need a civilian attorney. We can provide referrals. He slid a business card across the desk with a name underlined. Carla Jensen, civilian family law and domestic safety attorney, experienced with military cases and CPS involvement. I held the card in my hand longer than necessary. It felt strange to have a piece of contact information feel like a chance at safety. After leaving JAG, I sat in my car for several minutes while Lily slept in the back seat. Her small breaths filled the quiet. I looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her hair was still damp from the bath she insisted on taking with Bubbles that morning, as if Bubbles could wash away memory. I dialed the number. A receptionist answered and asked if this was an emergency case. My voice surprised me when I said yes. Not panicked, not shaking. Clear, controlled. They scheduled me for the next morning. When I walked into Carla Jensen's office, she stood immediately and offered a handshake that carried confidence without stiffness. She was in her 40s, sharp eyes, steady tone, dressed professionally, but not in a way that tried to intimidate. She motioned for me to sit and said, "Start from the beginning. All of it." I told her everything in order. I told her about the shove, the way Brianna watched, the way Mark held me back, the way my mother ignored Lily gasping for breath. I told her about the water pit behind the barracks deep enough after the storm to trap a child. I told her about my childhood memories, the old bruises, the discipline disguised as control. I told her what Lily whispered at night when she thought I was not listening. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment, as if sorting every detail into a timeline only she could see clearly. Then she opened a legal pad and said, "We have more than enough to move forward, but we are not approaching this emotionally. We are approaching this structurally." That was the moment I knew I had chosen correctly. She began listing what she needed, and I opened my folder. Medical report from WOMAC showing signs of water aspiration. Yes. CPS safety plan issued by Maria Torres. Yes. Photos of the canal. Yes. MP case number. Yes. Screenshots. Yes. Audio files. Yes. She organized everything in neat stacks and labeled each one without the slightest hesitation. Her efficiency made my pulse slow. She explained that our first action should be an emergency no-contact order. It would prohibit Mark, Brianna, and my mother from approaching me or Lily. It could be filed quickly because we had multiple forms of evidence, and the involvement of MPs and CPS gave the case substantial legal weight. Next, she explained the long-term plan. We would file for a permanent protective order. We would request sole decision-making for Lily. We would limit any potential contact my family might attempt in the future. And we would build a custody strategy that ensured Lily could never be placed in their care under any circumstance. I listened carefully as she spoke. Her tone was calm, but firm. You have a strong case because the danger was immediate and documented. And because it happened on federal property, the legal system takes it very seriously. I exhaled slowly because every sentence she said felt like another lock turning into place. I told her I did not want revenge. I wanted safety and permanence. She nodded approvingly. Revenge burns out quickly. Protection requires structure, and structure is what wins cases. She walked me through every document, the photos of the water pit, the screenshot of the messages my mother sent calling me dramatic, the audio of Brianna mocking Lily. She asked me if I understood that once we filed for an emergency order, everything would be on official record. There would be no going back, no softening, no pretending it was just a misunderstanding. I looked at her straight and said, "I do not want to go back." She smiled slightly. "Then we are aligned." Over the next 2 hours, we built a timeline. Not just the incident itself, but every small pattern leading up to it. Carla took my childhood history and labeled it context. She took the recent months and labeled them escalation. She took the incident behind the barracks and labeled it critical event. She explained how judges look at patterns. One incident is tragic, a series of incidents is dangerous, and this made judges act quickly. She prepared a draft affidavit for me to sign. Reading my own words written in legal language made my stomach twist because seeing the truth printed in ink felt heavier than saying it aloud. It looked like someone else's life, someone else's tragedy, but it was mine. I signed it without hesitation. Carla leaned back in her chair and said something that somehow steadied me even more. "This is the moment you stop reacting and start reclaiming control. People like your stepfather rely on chaos and fear. When you bring structure into the equation, they lose power." I nodded because I understood that language. The Army taught me about structure, about order, about systems built to protect. I had never thought of using those same principles in my personal life because survival had always overshadowed strategy, but now strategy was everything. Carla scheduled the emergency filing for the next morning. She said she would accompany me to court and that she expected approval due to the severity of the incident and the involvement of multiple agencies. Before I left, she asked me one final question. "Do you want supervised contact for them or no contact at all?" I did not hesitate. "No contact at all." She nodded as if she had expected that answer. "Good, because based on everything you have shown me, it is the safest option." I walked out of her office with Lily holding my hand. The air outside felt heavy but clean in a strange way. For the first time in my life, I was not waiting for fear to find me. I was moving toward justice, not loudly, not dramatically, but step by step with the case strong enough to dismantle the entire foundation my family built their cruelty on. And as I buckled Lily into her car seat, she smiled sleepily and said, "Mama, can we get ice cream?" I smiled back because after everything she had survived, she deserved sweetness more than anything. "Yes, baby, we can get ice cream." And as we drove toward the small shop near Yadkin Road, I realized something simple and powerful. This was not just about building a case. It was about building our freedom. Every document, every report, every signature, it was all leading to the moment when they would finally lose access to the one thing they had used to hurt me my whole life. Me. And now, my daughter. That access was ending. For good. I knew the storm was coming long before the first call arrived. People like my family did not process consequences. They attacked them. They denied them. They twisted them until they could pretend nothing was ever their fault. That pattern had been true since I was a child, and it did not change now. The morning after meeting with Carla, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. It was a number I recognized even after changing my phone. My mother. Somehow she had gotten the new number, probably through relatives or someone at church. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. 20 seconds later, it rang again. This time I answered because silence gives people like her space to create their own version of events. Her voice came through tight and irritated. "Rowan, you need to stop exaggerating. Kids fall in water all the time." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, but it did not swallow me like it used to. I stood straighter and kept my tone calm, quiet, controlled. She did not fall. She was pushed. My mother scoffed. "Oh, please, you always escalate everything." If you had not been shouting, maybe she would not have panicked. The absurdity of that sentence hung in the air. "I did not shout," I said, and she did not panic. She was drowning. My mother's voice sharpened. "You make everything dramatic. You are trying to turn a mistake into some kind of attack. You need to calm down and stop involving outsiders in family matters." I felt something shift inside me. The old daughter who used to explain herself was gone. I kept my voice even and short. "This is not a family matter." My mother paused. "Rowan, listen to me. You are going too far. You need to stop this before people think you cannot handle your child." It was a threat disguised as concern, a tactic she had used for years. I did not respond emotionally. I simply said, "I am not discussing this. Goodbye." And I hung up. The next call came from Mark. His contact did not show a name, but I knew his cadence immediately. His first words came in low, controlled anger. "You are not taking my grandchild away." I held the phone but did not speak. He continued. "You think you can run to the army and your little agencies and make us look like monsters? I am warning you. You will regret this." Old Rowan would have felt her stomach twist at that tone. Old Rowan would have defended herself or tried to reason with him. But I was not that version anymore. I spoke slowly and clearly. "Do not call this number again. You have no access to Lily, period." He barked something harsh, a half growl, half curse, but I did not let him finish. I hung up. I stood still for a moment, letting the silence settle. Soldier mode was not just an attitude. It was a decision. It meant no unnecessary words, no emotional explanations, no attempts to soothe egos. Just facts, boundaries, action. And that was exactly what the situation required. Throughout the day, more calls came. Unknown numbers, cousins, church members, people who had no business being involved. They all carried the same script of minimization. It was an accident. Kids get hurt. You know how water scares children. You are misunderstanding the situation. One even said maybe Brianna was joking. I hung up each time without giving space for argument. Every call confirmed the same thing. My family was losing control of the narrative and they were scrambling. At lunchtime, a voicemail arrived from my mother filled with shaky dramatics. "Rowan, you are tearing this family apart. You are humiliating us. You cannot take Lily away from everyone who loves her." When I finished listening, I deleted the message without hesitation. People who love do not drown a child. People who love do not hold a mother back from saving her. Around mid-afternoon, I stepped outside to breathe and saw a car I recognized from a distance. My uncle's truck. He was talking to one of my neighbors 2 houses down. The neighbor pointed toward my home. My uncle's eyes followed the gesture. I watched from behind my living room blinds, not afraid but alert. When he started walking in my direction, I opened my door before he could knock. I stood in the doorway blocking the entry and said, "Can I help you?" His face shifted between concern and irritation. "Rowan? What is going on? Your mother is a mess. She says you are spreading stories and causing trouble." I kept my voice flat. "I am protecting my daughter." He blinked and exhaled sharply. "Come on. You know Mark has a short temper, but he would never really hurt Lily. And Brianna is just young. Do not blow this up." I stared at him until he stopped talking. Then I said one sentence. "They almost killed my child." He swallowed hard because the words did not leave room for interpretation. He recovered quickly, though, with a practiced dismissiveness. "Nobody meant harm. Things got out of hand. But you need to stop and fix this." I stepped forward slightly, making sure he saw the ring camera above the door. "No one is fixing anything. They did what they did. There is a CPS case. There is an MP report. There will be legal orders." He took a step back. His voice turned defensive. "So you are really doing this? You are really turning on your own blood?" It was the wrong thing to say. I responded with calm precision. "Lily is my blood. They are not. And if you show up here again, security will escort you off base." I closed the door slowly, not dramatically. A controlled movement. Soldier mode. That evening, I received a message from Pastor Grant updating me that Mark and Brianna had been removed quietly from all volunteer lists. He did not elaborate, but he added, "Rowan, if you need anything or if you feel unsafe, please contact me." That message told me exactly what I needed to know. Word was spreading. The community had begun to shift its weight away from them and toward accountability. And my family could feel it, which explained the escalation. Around 8:30, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my mother. It said, "Rowan, please talk to me. You cannot cut your family out because of a misunderstanding. Think about Lily." I stared at the message, then typed back a single sentence. "I am thinking about her." Then I put my phone down. No explanations. No emotional labor. No negotiations. The storm was gathering on their side, but on mine, everything was becoming clearer. They relied on confusion, chaos, guilt, and denial. But when those weapons stopped working, they had nothing left. And I had everything they never expected me to have. Evidence, support, structure, a legal team, a military community, and a voice I finally trusted. As Lily slept peacefully that night, the sounds of base lights humming outside her window, I realized something with absolute certainty. The storm was only beginning for them, but for us, it was finally clearing. Family Day at the battalion was supposed to be lighthearted. Soldiers brought spouses and children. There were picnic tables lined up near the parade field booths with unit memorabilia, a static display of vehicles, and a bouncy house for kids. It was the kind of event meant to remind everyone that behind the training schedules and deployment cycles, there was still community. I almost did not go. Part of me wanted to stay home with Lily, keep her cocooned in the safety we had built over the past week. But my commander had asked if I could help introduce some of the new soldiers' families, and I did not want to let him down. More important, I wanted Lily to see that not all families were dangerous. Not all adults ignored suffering. Not all authority figures harmed. So we went. I dressed Lily in a soft yellow dress and braided her hair. She held my hand tightly as we walked across the field. Some soldiers waved, and she waved back shyly. Everything felt normal for the first 10 minutes. Calm, steady, predictable. Then I saw them. Mark and my mother standing near the edge of the field. They were not invited. They had no access to base beyond the visitor center unless they were escorted or approved. Yet here they were. I felt my stomach twist, but I kept my posture straight. I saw the way my mother's eyes narrowed and the way Mark scanned the area like he was evaluating an audience. Brianna was not with them, and for a brief moment, I was grateful. One less set of eyes for Lily to fear. My commander, Lieutenant Colonel Sanders, noticed my face change. He was a tall man with a calm voice who could read a room faster than anyone. He stepped beside me. "Everything all right, Captain Hale?" I kept my eyes on Mark and said quietly, "They are not supposed to be here, sir." Before he could respond, my mother raised her voice just enough for nearby families to turn. "Rowan, we need to talk." My commander's posture shifted instantly. He had been in long enough to recognize when a situation was about to escalate. He stepped forward, not aggressively, but with clear authority. "Ma'am, this is a military event. If you are not sponsored on post, I need to ask who signed you in." My mother tried to put on her polite smile. "We came with a friend. We just want to speak with our daughter." Mark added loudly, "We have a right to be here. She has been lying to everyone." That word lying sliced through the air because people in the military hear it differently. To accuse an officer of lying in a public setting is serious. A few soldiers nearby turned their heads. I felt Lily grip my hand tighter. My voice stayed low and calm. "You need to leave. You are not authorized to be here." Mark ignored me and stepped forward, projecting his voice for effect. "She is destroying our family, making up stories, trying to smear us to her unit. She is unstable." My mother nodded vigorously as if everything he said was truth. The accusation hung there. Several families stopped eating. A few junior soldiers froze awkwardly. The kind of silence that follows a truth or a lie that must be confronted settled over the area. I could feel my pulse in my throat. Not from fear, but from something sharper: precision, resolve, soldier mode. I looked at my commander and said, "Sir, can I address this?" He nodded once. "Absolutely." I walked to the small stage area where the battalion had set up a portable projector for the slideshow later that afternoon. My voice was steady when I said, "Could I have your attention for a moment?" Conversations slowed. Soldiers turned. Spouses paused mid-step. My commander and first sergeant stepped beside me as support without saying a word. Mark crossed his arms like he was ready to watch me fail. My mother stood stiff-faced tight with anticipation. I connected my phone to the projector. The screen lit up. The first image appeared. Footage from my Ring camera. The recording showed them standing on my doorstep last week, pounding on the door and yelling. You could hear Mark saying, "Stop hiding behind rules. We deserve access." The crowd went silent. I tapped again. Audio played next. Mark's voice repeated clearly, "If she is weak, she does not survive." The exact sentence he whispered when he held me back as Lily drowned. Gasps spread through the field. Someone whispered, "Dear God." I tapped again. The screen showed a photo of the canal behind the barracks the day after the incident. Deep, muddy water, a clear hazard for a child. Then the image shifted to the medical report from Womack documenting water aspiration. No graphic details, just the official lines proving Lily had been in real danger. Then the final slide, a redacted excerpt from the MP report. It stated plainly that witnesses confirmed I had been prevented from reaching my daughter. A soldier standing in the crowd murmured, "That's attempted harm." Another soldier whispered, "They let a 6-year-old drown." Mark exploded. "This is out of context. She is manipulating this. She is making us look bad." My mother echoed, "She always twists everything. She wants attention." Lieutenant Colonel Sanders stepped forward then. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that quieted every corner of the field. "Mr. Ellison, you will leave now. This is not a request." Mark looked like he had been slapped with reality. He opened his mouth, but the first sergeant stepped forward so quickly and efficiently that Mark froze. "Sir, you are not authorized on this installation. You will proceed with the escort to the gate. Now." 2 MPs approached from the perimeter and positioned themselves beside Mark and my mother. The entire battalion watched, not with triumph, not with cruelty, but with absolute clarity. People saw what happened. They saw the truth. And there was no version of this moment where my family could pretend they were victims. My mother's face crumpled not out of shame, but out of loss. Loss of control. Loss of image. Loss of superiority. As the MPs walked them toward the parking lot, the only sound was the soft chatter of children and the distant hum of base traffic. The event continued around us, but something fundamental had changed. Everyone knew the truth. And once truth is spoken in the open, it cannot be undone. My commander turned to me. His voice softened. "You did the right thing, Captain. If you need time, resources, anything, you have it." I nodded, but my mind was still steady and focused. This moment was not about humiliation. It was about reclaiming something my family stole from me for years. My voice, my credibility, my narrative. When I looked down at Lily, she was watching me with wide eyes. She whispered, "Mama, they believe you." I knelt and kissed her forehead. "Yes, baby, they do." For the first time in my life, the truth did not cost me anything. It protected us. It exposed them. It shifted the entire balance of power. And as the sun lowered behind the motor pool and the field filled with chatter again, I felt something I had not felt since I was a child. Safety. Not because danger was gone, but because the world finally saw it clearly. And because the people who caused it were finally being pushed out of every space they once used to harm us. In the 48 hours after Family Day, the world around my family shifted in ways they never expected. Not loudly, not chaotically, not with people screaming or pointing fingers. The consequences came quietly, the way doors close when people finally see the truth behind them. That kind of silence is far more devastating than any public spectacle. The first ripple came from the church in Spring Lake. Pastor Grant called me early the next morning. His voice was calm but firm. "Rowan, I wanted you to know the board met last night. After reviewing the information, we removed your stepfather and your sister from all volunteer positions effective immediately. There will be no reinstatement." As he spoke, I pictured the small volunteer board sitting in the fellowship hall, looking over documents, recognizing the seriousness of what had happened. No raised voices, no debate. Just a quiet, collective decision someone like Mark could never charm or bully his way out of. I thanked the pastor softly. He told me he was praying for Lily and said one more thing. "The congregation has a responsibility to protect children. We honor that." When I hung up, I felt a small wave of relief. The church had been one of the strongest shields my family used to maintain their image. Now that shield was gone. By the afternoon, the second ripple had begun. Spring Lake is a small community. People talk, not in dramatic announcements, but in small conversations across backyards and grocery store aisles. I stopped by the corner market to pick up milk and granola bars for Lily. A woman who used to greet my mother with enthusiastic hugs turned toward me in the aisle. Her expression shifted into something complicated: sympathy, caution, realization. She said softly, "I saw what happened at the event. I am so sorry you went through that." And then she added quietly, "I had no idea." It was a phrase I heard several times that day. I had no idea. Not because the incident was hard to understand, but because my family was excellent at smiling in public. They knew how to present themselves. They knew which words made them sound responsible and which words made me look distant. But once the evidence played on that projector, the performance could not continue. People began distancing themselves. A neighbor of my mother's who used to host cookouts with Mark posted in a private Spring Lake community group that he would be stepping back from events until certain concerns were addressed. A couple who often attended church dinners with my family stopped responding to my mother's messages. And those who once dismissed my concerns now kept their children far away from Mark. Consequence by distance. Consequence without drama. The third ripple started at Brianna's community college. I received a message from a former classmate of hers who had seen some of the information circulating. It was not viral. It was not public humiliation. It was official. Quiet, a push toward accountability. The message said the school administration temporarily suspended Brianna from campus activities pending an investigation. Apparently, someone on staff had seen the MP report excerpt that was used during Family Day. It was not leaked. It was part of the required documentation for the protective order. Schools take dangerous behavior seriously, especially when minors are involved. I did not celebrate her suspension, but I did feel a deep breath leave my body, because finally, someone besides me was saying her actions mattered, that she could not laugh at a child drowning and walk away untouched. The fourth ripple came directly from the installation. After the Family Day incident, Mark tried to return to base the next morning. His truck pulled up to the All-American gate and he attempted to sign in with a visitor pass. Instead, he was met by security personnel who had already received updated documentation from the MPs. The guard asked him to step out of the vehicle and wait to the side. According to the security sergeant who later briefed me, he was confused and irritated, demanding to be allowed in, insisting he had every right to see his family. But rights on a military installation do not work that way. Not for civilians. Not when there is an active case. Not when the commander himself has witnessed an outburst. The security team escorted him off the installation. Not violently, not dramatically, just firmly. He was told not to return without written authorization. He did not receive it, and he would not. When the sergeant called to inform me later, he apologized for the encounter causing any stress, but I assured him it did not. Knowing Mark was denied access to the installation made my entire home feel safer. The fifth ripple came from within my family itself. Extended relatives began calling less. Some stopped entirely, not because they suddenly supported me, but because aligning with my mother or Mark now carried consequences they did not want to bear. People avoided involvement because the truth now had paperwork behind it, the kind that does not disappear when someone tells a different story. One evening, I sat at the dining table looking over Lily's homework as she colored beside me. The Ring camera blinked softly on the screen of my phone. A notification popped up. Motion detected. I checked the feed. A familiar figure stood at the edge of the parking lot across the street. My mother. She did not approach my home. She did not walk up to the door. She simply stood there for a moment and then walked away. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically, emotionally, like she was searching for an entry that no longer existed. I watched her disappear down the sidewalk, not with anger, not with triumph, just with a quiet acceptance that something irreversible had happened. The final ripple of the week came from people within my unit. Soldiers who had never spoken about their personal lives approached me privately during work. A staff sergeant said, "Mom, I saw what happened. If you need anything, let us know." A specialist quietly mentioned his own childhood. Another soldier just nodded respectfully and said, "You handled that with strength." That support meant more than any public recognition. It reminded me that community can break you, but it can also rebuild you. And slowly, the balance of power shifted entirely. My family did not collapse with shouts. They collapsed with silence. People stopped showing up for them, stopped defending them, stopped excusing them. Every door that once opened easily now closed without emotion or ceremony. And while they were left standing alone in the world they built for themselves, I sat beside my daughter each night watching her breathe peacefully. Knowing that every consequence around us was another layer of safety wrapping around her small body. The storm that once centered around us had moved. Now it hovered above the people who created it. And for the first time in my life, the consequences were not mine to carry. They were theirs. The night everything shifted again did not arrive with shouting or threats or bold attempts to force his way back into our lives. It came with rain. Heavy, steady North Carolina rain that fell in sheets against the windows of my new on-base housing, pooling under the streetlights and turning the sidewalks into silver streams. Lily was already asleep upstairs, curled in her lavender blanket, her breathing soft and steady after a long day of therapy and swim practice. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea, reviewing tomorrow's supply reports, letting the quiet settle over me like a long overdue exhale. Then came the knock, slow, heavy, intentional, not frantic, not desperate. The kind of knock that said someone wanted to be heard, someone who believed they still had the right to demand attention. My body stiffened immediately. Something old and familiar flickered through my chest. Not fear exactly, but recognition. I set down my mug, walked to the front door, and checked the Ring feed. And there he was, Mark Ellison, my stepfather. The man who had held me back while my daughter fought for air in a pit of muddy water. The man who said a child who could not survive did not deserve to live. The man who lost access to us because he chose cruelty over blood. He stood on my porch, soaked through rain, sliding off the brim of his cheap baseball cap, shoulders hunched, not from humility, but from the sudden weight of consequences. I cracked the door open no more than 10 centimeters, keeping the security chain in place, keeping the barrier between us firm and unmistakable. He blinked at me, rain dripping from his eyelashes, his expression folding into something he must have practiced in his truck mirror before walking up here. Something like sorrow, something like regret, but not accountability. Never accountability. "Rowan, please," he said, his voice thick like wet gravel. "Please just listen. Your mother, she is not doing well. She barely gets out of bed. She says she cannot breathe without her family." I let the silence stretch between us. The rain hit the porch louder wind, pushing it sideways. My stepfather continued. "She is depressed, really depressed. This whole situation has broken her. You need to help the family." I stared at him, feeling a strange calm settle into my bones. A soldier's calm, a mother's resolve. A woman who learned the hard way that sentiment without responsibility is just manipulation with a softer tone. Behind him, the parking lot shimmered under the street lamps. Fat droplets hit the pavement like tiny explosions. He shifted his weight, clearly expecting me to say something warm or soft or receptive. He tried again. "Rowan, I know things got out of hand, but we are still family. You cannot do this. You cannot cut us out. We need you. Your mother needs you." And then his voice cracked just enough to reveal the truth he would never admit out loud. He needed access. He needed the old power. He needed the old dynamic where I was small and he was in control. He needed the image he built in the community that was now collapsing around him. That was the only reason he came. Not because he loved her. Not because he felt remorse. Because without access to us, he had no leverage left in the world he once dominated with intimidation and charm. I let the tension hang for a long moment. His breathing turned uneven. He took a half step forward, but stopped when the security chain rattled gently. I finally spoke. My voice was steady, low, grounded. The kind of voice that comes from a place so firm it can never be shaken again. "You had your chance. Lily gets to live. You lose access forever." His face crumpled in a way I had never seen. Not the anger he used to weaponize, not the cold indifference he used to intimidate. No, this was collapse, realization, the dawning awareness that I was not bending. Not this time, not ever again. He opened his mouth like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. The rain intensified, turning his silhouette into a blurred shape framed by water. I watched him absorb the sentence the way someone absorbs a final verdict. No yelling, no bargaining, no excuses. Just the slow, sinking understanding that whatever he once controlled was gone. Completely. I released the door slowly, letting the gap shrink as the chain tightened slightly. Then I closed it the rest of the way with a quiet final click. No slamming, no theatrics, just closure. He remained on the porch for a long moment. I could see his shadow through the frosted glass, standing still in the rain, like he did not know where to go next now that the last door had shut on him. Eventually, he stepped back. 1 step, 2, 3. Then he turned and walked away into the storm, his figure shrinking beneath the streetlights. His shoulders were slumped, his steps uneven. Not from grief for Lily, not from remorse for what he did, from loss of power. From the collapse of the only leverage he thought he had. I locked the deadbolt. I stood there for a moment, hand resting on the cool metal, and for the first time since the day in the mud behind the barracks, I felt something wash through me. Not anger, not fear, not grief. Peace. A small, fierce peace that came from knowing I had defended my daughter not only with instinct, but with boundaries that could never again be broken. Upstairs, Lily stirred in her sleep, murmuring softly, then settling again. I walked to the bottom step, watching the gentle glow of her nightlight spill into the hallway. My home was quiet, protected, safe. Outside, the rain kept falling, washing the porch clean, clearing the air, carrying the last threads of my stepfather's control away with it. And as I turned off the living room light, I realized something that settled deep in my chest like a final truth. That moment at the door was not the end for me. It was the end for him. The final strip of authority slipping through his fingers. The last echo of a power he would never reclaim. And he knew it. He walked away into the dark, carrying nothing but the consequences he created and the silence I left him with. And that silence spoke louder than any scream ever could. The morning we went to court, the sky over Fayetteville was pale and cold, the kind of gray that makes the whole world feel suspended, as if the day is waiting to see what you will do next. I drove to the courthouse with a steadiness I had not felt in weeks. In the passenger seat of my car, a folder sat buckled in like a second passenger filled with every document that had built this case piece by piece: the medical report from Womack, the MP incident form, the CPS notes, the written statement from Pastor Grant, the screenshots, the audio clips, the photo of the water pit behind the barracks, still muddy from the storm. Carla Jensen met me at the courthouse steps wearing a navy suit and carrying the same expression she always had, calm, sharp, and completely unshaken by the drama of toxic families. She nodded once and said, "You ready, Captain?" I was not sure if ready was the right word, but I nodded anyway, because what mattered was that I was here. For Lily. For the first time in my life for myself. The hallways inside Cumberland County Courthouse were lined with other people waiting for hearings, couples not speaking to each other, parents hunched over paperwork, grandparents gripping photo albums. Everyone was fighting for someone or something. Carla guided me to a bench outside courtroom 3B and reviewed our plan. "Emergency protective order first," she said. Then the long-term no-contact order. Based on the evidence and the MP report, I expect the judge to approve the full 300-foot restriction. When she said those words, full and 300 feet, my chest loosened in a way I could actually feel. Distance, boundaries, safety that did not rely on my vigilance alone. When our case was called, I walked inside the courtroom, my palms cool, not sweaty. Being a soldier had trained me for spaces like this, calm under structure, calm under scrutiny, calm under pressure. The judge, an older woman with silver hair, pulled into a low bun, read through the initial packet. She paused more than once at specific lines. The MP report describing Mark restraining me from rescuing Lily. The CPS notation that Brianna shoved Lily into the water. The medical documentation showing signs of aspirated water and mild hypothermia. She looked up at me. "Captain Hale, is this accurate?" "Yes, Your Honor." Her eyes sharpened. "And the statements from the military police?" "Also accurate." She nodded once, as if confirming something she already understood about the gravity of the situation. Then the clerk announced that those named in the filing had been notified. My stomach tightened. They were here. The door at the back of the courtroom opened, and my mother Sandra walked in first, looking pale and stunned, as if she still did not fully grasp how serious this had become. Brianna followed, arms crossed, chin-up eyes darting around the room like the world still owed her approval. And behind them, Mark entered with the same stiff posture he wore at the Family Day confrontation, though now it carried something else behind it, a quiet desperation. They sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. I did not look at them again. The judge continued, "We will hear from the petitioner." Carla stood. "Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. This is a clear case of endangerment and obstruction of rescue. The child involved is 6 years old. The behavior of the respondents constitutes an immediate risk. We request an emergency protective order followed by a long-term no-contact order of 300 feet applying to all 3 individuals." The judge asked her a few clarifying questions, but she did not ask many. She had seen enough cases to know when harm was not an accident and when a child had survived something she never should have. Then the judge asked the question I knew was coming. "Does the respondent wish to speak?" Mark stood. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. Families have disagreements. We love Lily. We would never harm her." I watched Carla's eyebrows lift by barely a millimeter, a silent reaction that said the judge would see through this instantly. The judge did. She flipped back to the MP report. "According to this Mr. Ellison, you prevented the mother from assisting a drowning child." He swallowed hard. "It was a mistake." The judge's voice turned cold. "A mistake is spilling a glass of water. This was an act that endangered a child's life. Sit down." Mark sat, slowly, carefully, as if the weight of the room finally pressed down hard enough that he could feel it. The judge asked if my mother or Brianna wished to speak. My mother shook her head. Brianna turned her face away. Their silence spoke more truth than any words possibly could. The judge folded her hands. "Based on the evidence and testimony, I am granting the emergency protective order effective immediately. Furthermore, I am approving the no contact order for the maximum distance allowed 300 feet. This applies to Mr. Ellison, Ms. Ellison, and Ms. Brianna Ellison. No contact means no calls, no texts, no visits, no third-party messages, and no presence at the child's school residence or activities. Any violation will result in immediate arrest." The words fell into the air with the weight of a verdict, but also with a clarity that cut through weeks of fear. I felt my lungs fill more deeply than they had in months. The judge continued. "Captain Hale, you will receive the official document from the bailiff. Please review it with your attorney." The gavel came down, the clerk called the next case, and it was done. When we stepped out into the hallway, the bailiff approached me holding a thick set of papers with a blue stamped seal. He handed them to me with a respectful nod. "Here you go, ma'am. This order is active as of 5 minutes ago." I took the papers. They felt heavier than they looked, as if all the weight I had carried all my life had been absorbed into them and then locked there forever, no longer mine to shoulder. Carla touched my arm lightly. "You did well. You were composed. Judges respect that." I nodded, unable to say anything yet. But it was not pride swelling in my chest. It was relief. Quiet, deep, uncluttered relief. We walked toward the exit, passing the same people waiting for their hearings. When we reached the front steps, I finally looked up at the sky. The gray had lifted slightly, letting in thin streaks of light. Carla asked softly, "How do you feel?" I answered with the closest truth I had, like I can breathe again. Across the parking lot, I saw my mother standing beside Mark. She looked at me with disbelief, like she still expected me to fold like every other year of my life. But I did not. I did not stop. I did not speak. I did not offer softness where none had ever been given. I got into my car, I buckled my seatbelt, and with the court order secured beside me, I drove away not with triumph but with a quiet victory that filled the entire car. The kind of victory that does not need applause because it already contains everything that matters. The safety of my daughter, the freedom of my own life, the final break from a family that never protected anything but their own power. And as the courthouse shrank in my rearview mirror, I whispered one simple truth to myself. It is over now. For us, it is finally over. Moving into the new on-base housing felt less like a simple relocation and more like stepping into a different chapter of my life, one where safety was finally something tangible instead of something I had to fight for every single day. The house was small, just 2 bedrooms, a narrow living room, and a modest kitchen, but when I opened the door for the first time with Lily beside me, it felt like stepping into a quiet sanctuary. The kind of place where the walls did not echo with old arguments. The kind of place where footsteps in the hallway belonged only to the people I trusted. I walked through each room, slowly checking locks, testing windows, letting my body relearn what stability felt like. Lily ran ahead, touching the blank walls, examining the empty shelves, asking which room would be hers. Her voice had a softness again, not free from fear entirely, but no longer shaped by it. After we brought in the first boxes, she sat cross-legged on the floor of her new bedroom, arranging her plush toys in a careful circle like she was introducing them to their new home. Watching her do that, I felt something inside my chest unwind. Not fully, not suddenly, but enough. The next step was swim lessons. I was not sure I was emotionally ready to see her near water again, but I knew she needed it. I needed her to reclaim that part of her life, so the memory of the muddy pit behind the barracks would not own every drop of water she ever encountered. The YMCA in Fayetteville had a special program for children who had experienced water trauma, and the first day we arrived, the instructor, a calm, middle-aged woman named Margaret, knelt down to Lily's level and said gently, "We go at your pace, sweetheart. No hurrying, no pressure, just learning to feel strong in the water." Lily nodded, clutching my sleeve. She looked terrified, but also determined, and I recognized that expression. It was the same one I had the day I left home and enlisted. The expression of a girl who was done being afraid, even if the fear had not fully left her body yet. For the first few lessons, Lily sat on the edge of the pool, refusing to put her feet in. I sat behind her on a bench, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee, watching her breathing rise and fall in uneven waves. Sometimes she whispered, "Mommy, I do not want to," and every time I answered the same way, "It is okay. You are safe. We do it slow." By the third week, she let Margaret guide her into the shallow end. Her whole body trembled, but she stayed. She held the instructor's hands. She kicked her legs. She kept her eyes open. And when she resurfaced for the first time after putting her face fully underwater, she looked over at me with a mixture of pride and disbelief, like she had done something impossible. I clapped for her, quietly but fully. The trauma therapy sessions were harder for both of us in ways I did not anticipate. The therapist at Womack, a gentle clinician named Dr. Halpern, who specialized in family trauma, had a way of asking questions that felt both simple and seismic at the same time. For Lily, the sessions involved drawing feelings with colored markers or using dolls to show what it felt like when she fell into the water. For me, the sessions involved something far more difficult, admitting that the people who raised me had never been safe. Speaking the truth about the nights I hid in closets, the mornings I walked on eggshells, the punishments disguised as discipline, the way Mark's voice could freeze the air in a room, the way my mother dismissed everything I said until I eventually stopped saying anything at all. Trauma therapy requires honesty, but honesty feels like peeling away armor and exposing the bruises underneath long after they stopped showing on your skin. That first week after the protective order was granted, I slept lightly, waking at every small noise as if expecting the past to suddenly appear at my door. I checked the locks twice, 3 times, sometimes more before going to bed. I kept my phone within reach. I kept the nightlight on in the hallway for Lily, but maybe also for myself. But over time, the silence of the new house began to feel less like the calm before another storm and more like actual peace. One night, about a month after the move, I realized something without consciously looking for it. I had slept 5 straight hours. 5. I had not done that in years. When I woke up, the house was quiet, but in a soft, harmless way. Not the tense quiet that used to fill my mother's house. The kind that meant someone was angry, someone was waiting, someone was listening for a mistake. In my new home, quiet meant rest, quiet meant safety. Quiet meant Lily breathing evenly in her room without nightmares waking her every few hours. On weekends, we started building new routines, just the two of us. Pancakes on Saturday mornings at the tiny diner off Bragg Boulevard. Walks around Masaryk Park where Lily collected leaves and pointed out every squirrel she saw. Afternoons at the library in Spring Lake where the librarian always smiled warmly at her and never once asked about our family. The world outside us was healing too. The unit embraced us in small but important ways. Soldiers stopped by with hand-me-down books for Lily or dropped off casserole dishes after long work weeks. One of the younger specialists installed a new porch light for me when I mentioned mine was flickering. Another soldier from Supply brought over extra batteries for the smoke detectors. It was not grand gestures. It was community. Real community. And after a lifetime of surviving within a family that used the word family like a trap, the idea of strangers offering kindness felt almost foreign, but I accepted it. Slowly, carefully, gratefully. Every step of rebuilding safety came with its own emotional weight. Some days I felt strong, some days exhausted, some days victorious, some days small. But in every one of those days, I kept seeing the same thing in my daughter's eyes. Light, real light, the kind that had been dimmed but not extinguished. One evening, as I tucked her into bed, she whispered, "Mommy, I do not dream about the water anymore." I paused. My hand froze in her hair, and I said softly, "That is because you are safe now." She smiled that sleepy smile only children can manage and drifted off. I sat beside her bed for a long time that night, not because I was afraid, but because I finally had the freedom to simply sit and feel grateful. Peace is not dramatic. Peace does not arrive with noise. Peace grows quietly like a seed pushing its way through the soil after a long winter. And in that small on-base house with clean air and locked doors and new routines, and a daughter who was slowly learning to trust the world again, I realized that our winter was finally ending, and spring was finally ours. The first sign that my life was shifting in ways I had never expected came less than 2 weeks after Lily began her new swim lessons. I was sitting at my desk in the Battalion S4 office reviewing maintenance reports for the upcoming rotation when I heard a sharp knock on the door frame. I looked up and saw Lieutenant Colonel Abrams, my battalion commander, standing there with his hands clasped behind him, his expression unreadable in that very Army way that always made soldiers sit up straighter, whether they intended to or not. "Captain Hale," he said, stepping inside for a moment. "Do you have a minute?" I stood immediately. "Yes, sir." He nodded toward the conference room. "Walk with me." The phrase always meant something was coming, something bigger than a simple tasking or supply directive. I followed him inside, and he closed the door behind us before gesturing for me to sit. I remained standing for a moment out of habit, but he motioned again, insisting. I sat. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I want you to hear this from me directly," he began. "What you showed at Family Day required immense composure. Not only the evidence, but the professionalism you maintained through an extremely difficult personal moment. The command team took note." My throat tightened slightly. Hearing someone acknowledge the difficulty out loud, even in a professional setting, hit somewhere deep in my chest where resilience and exhaustion lived side by side. "Sir, I appreciate that," I said carefully. He continued. "More important, the way you handled the aftermath, the MP involvement, the CPS coordination, the school safety measures. You did not let your personal crisis affect your duty performance. That is the kind of officer we need more of." I let those words sink in because there had been days, weeks, even when I felt like I was barely keeping myself upright, let alone fulfilling the responsibilities of an Army captain. Yet somehow I had done both at once. Colonel Abrams slid a folder toward me. Inside was a packet with the familiar gold crest at the top. "Advanced Leaders Program Selection." My heart clenched. "Sir," I began, but he held up his hand. "I am recommending you for the next available slot. You have earned it. You have the temperament, the resilience, and the leadership qualities that ALC looks for." I exhaled slowly, not realizing I had been holding my breath. "Sir, I would be honored." He nodded. "Good. And one more thing, Captain Hale." He paused, letting the weight of his next sentence build in the air. "I want you to consider taking on a more deliberate role with our younger soldiers. They look up to you." I blinked, not expecting that. "Me, sir?" He nodded again. "You have walked through fire, and you still carry yourself with discipline and dignity. That matters, especially to the younger ones who might be dealing with things we do not always see." That was the day everything changed. Not with fanfare, but with a new quiet purpose threaded through my days. I began holding informal resilience sessions twice a week in the empty classroom beside the S4 office. At first, only 2 soldiers showed up: a private first class who was dealing with a messy breakup and a specialist struggling with homesickness and financial strain. They sat stiffly as if unsure how much to say or how much to trust. But slowly, others began to join: a sergeant whose marriage was slipping, a young supply clerk burying stress behind sarcasm, a mechanic from Bravo Company who kept getting migraines from anxiety. I did not preach. I did not lecture. I spoke plainly about stress management training discipline and the importance of recognizing that even soldiers need support. Sometimes I shared parts of my story, not the most painful details, but the truth that resilience is not built from strength alone, but from survival and then rebuilding yourself afterward. One Thursday afternoon, after a supply layout ran long, I walked into the classroom expecting the usual handful and instead found almost a dozen soldiers sitting in a semicircle waiting quietly. One of the younger specialists looked up as I entered and smiled sheepishly. "Ma'am, we told others they should come. Hope that is okay." I hesitated for a moment, overwhelmed in a way I did not expect. "Of course," I said softly. "It is absolutely okay." We talked that day about boundaries, about letting go of guilt, about how strength does not mean silence. When the session ended, most filed out quickly to return to work, but one soldier, a private first class, lingered by the door. He was 19, maybe 20 tops tall, skinny, always at parade rest, even when he did not need to be. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I just want to say something." I turned toward him. "Go ahead." He shifted nervously before finally meeting my eyes. "Ma'am, I would follow you anywhere." The sentence hit me harder than I expected. It was the kind of thing soldiers say to leaders they trust deeply, the kind of loyalty that is not given lightly. I swallowed a lump in my throat. "Thank you, soldier. That means more than you know." He nodded once and hurried out the door as if embarrassed by his own sincerity. After he left, I sat down in one of the empty chairs and let myself feel the weight of his words. "I would follow you anywhere." Growing up in my mother's house, those words would have been unimaginable. No one followed me. No one listened to me. No one respected my voice. But here in the Army, in a place built on structure and responsibility and leadership, I had finally become someone whose presence brought steadiness instead of fear. Someone worth following. As the resilience sessions continued, soldiers began approaching me at random moments. In the motor pool, at the chow hall, in the hallway outside the battalion headquarters, some asked for advice on relationships. Some wanted help dealing with toxic parents of their own. Some just needed a place to talk without judgment. And each time I listened. Not because I was trying to be a hero, not because I wanted recognition, but because I understood what it meant to grow up without a safe space to fall apart. And I refused to let any soldier under my leadership feel that same isolation. Around the same time, Colonel Abrams informed me that my ALC packet had moved up the chain without any issues. He expected I would be slotted for the fall cycle. I thanked him again, and he responded with a rare, almost smile. "Do not thank me, Captain. You earned this." At home, Lily continued her swim lessons, progressing from shallow water to deep end under Margaret's steady guidance. Her confidence grew each week. Her therapist noted fewer trauma responses, fewer nightmares, more stable emotional regulation. My daughter was healing, slowly but undeniably, and I was healing with her. Nights became easier. Sleep came more naturally. I no longer flinched at unexpected sounds. I no longer checked the locks 10 times before bed. The quiet safety of our new home finally settled into my bones. But the biggest shift came one afternoon after PT when my platoon sergeant, an older NCO with 20 years in the Army, approached me. "Ma'am?" "I've seen a lot of leaders," he said. "Some good, some not so good. You are the kind soldiers remember. The kind they talk about 10 years later, because you make them feel like they matter." Hearing that from a senior NCO, a man who had served longer than I had even been old enough to enlist, felt like validation carved in stone. It told me that all I had endured, all the pain, all the fear, all the fights, and all the rebuilding had not just been about survival. It had shaped me into a leader who could lift others out of their own storms. In a way, the Army had become the family I never had. Not perfect, not without flaws, but built on accountability, built on structure, built on leadership that meant something. And as I walked back to my office that day with the sun rising over the motor pool and the hum of soldiers beginning their morning routines, I realized something profound. My past had not broken me. It had honed me, sharpened me, strengthened me. And now, standing here in uniform boots, grounded, steady breath, calm, I was not just leading soldiers. I was becoming the officer I once needed in my own life. And I was becoming the mother Lily needed in hers. The storm that once defined me had passed, and in its place stood a woman ready to lead, ready to grow, ready to rise. There are moments in life that do not feel like memories, but like turning points burned into the spine of who you become. And the day I returned to my mother's house with CPS and military police escort was one of those moments. Even now, I can still smell the faint scent of wet pine from the yard after a morning rain, the way my boots pressed into the gravel driveway, the tension in the air so thick, it felt like an invisible wall waiting for me to step through. CPS had told me it was time to retrieve all of Lily's remaining belongings from the house. Not alone, not vulnerable, not walking into their territory without protection. This time, I walked in with authority behind me. Real, tangible authority backed by a court order and the full force of every system that had once ignored my pleas. Maria Torres from CPS met me outside the property, clipboard in hand, her steady eyes giving me a small nod. Two MPs stood beside her, Staff Sergeant Lowell, a tall, calm presence, and Specialist Turner Younger, but focused, both wearing duty belts and that unmistakable posture of soldiers who knew exactly how to keep a situation under control. Captain Hale, Lowell said, "You ready?" I inhaled slowly, letting the cold air fill my lungs before answering. Yes. The house looked the same as it always had, and yet completely different at the same time. The siding was still a faded beige, the porch still cracked. The living room curtains still drawn halfway, like my mother was always trying to keep the world out and failing. But it was not my childhood home anymore. It was just a building, a place where pain lived, a place that used to hold power over me. Used to. Maria knocked firmly, not harsh, not timid, just official enough to make clear why we were here. After a moment, footsteps approached, uneven, quick, panicked. The door opened and my mother stood there, looking smaller than I ever remembered. Her hair was unbrushed, her eyes, puffy like tears, had dried on her face and left salt behind. For a second, her mouth opened as if she wanted to scold me like she always did. But then she saw the MPs behind me, and something in her expression broke. Maria spoke before my mother could say anything. "Mrs. Ellison, we are here to retrieve the child's belongings. This is not a negotiation." My mother's eyes darted from Maria to Lowell to me, searching for some old footing, some old script to lean on, but none of them existed anymore. Her voice cracked. "Rowan, please, can we talk about this?" I kept my tone even, steady, firm. "There is nothing to talk about. CPS has the order. We are here for Lily's things." She reached for my arm out of instinct, the way she used to do when she wanted to pull me back into old patterns of guilt and obligation. But Lowell subtly shifted forward, a warning without words. She froze. That was the first moment she realized the old chains had been cut. The second moment came seconds later when Mark appeared behind her. He stepped into the doorway, stiff, jaw-clenched eyes already narrowed. Not confused this time, not shocked this time, but angry that control was being taken from him in an official, permanent way. He stared at me with that same look he had the day he held me back from saving Lily, except this time, instead of fear rising in my chest, something else rose, something colder, sharper, grounded, the strength of a woman who no longer bowed, the strength of a mother who would never again let anyone decide her child's fate. Behind Mark, I heard lighter footsteps, and then Brianna appeared, arms crossed, but her eyes wide. She did not look smug. She did not look amused. She looked rattled, like someone had finally switched on a light she did not know existed, and now the world was brighter and harsher than she wanted it to be. Maria stepped forward. "We will proceed now. Captain Hale, please lead us to the child's room." I walked inside. My boots hitting the floor felt like punctuation, like every step was breaking another piece of the old story I had once been trapped in. The house smelled like stale coffee and old arguments. I walked up the stairs, not looking back, even when I heard my mother sob quietly into her hands and Brianna whisper, "What is happening?" Lily's room was exactly the way she left it. Small pink blanket, half-folded sketchbook open on the desk, a little stuffed giraffe on the pillow. Seeing the room twisted something in my chest, but not because of sadness, because of gratitude that she would never sleep here again. I packed her things calmly, placing her pajamas, her drawings, her books into the bag I brought. I took the tiger plush, she loved the one she clung to after nightmares, and tucked it safely into the top of the duffel. I heard Lowell and Turner downstairs, their voices low, steady, authoritative. The kind of presence my family never knew how to challenge. When I came back down the stairs with Lily's things, my family was standing in the living room in a line like children waiting for judgment. My mother's mascara had smeared across her cheeks. Brianna looked pale. Mark stared ahead, jaw tight, refusing to show emotion, but also refusing to move. Maria stood beside me. Staff Sergeant Lowell stepped forward, holding a folded sheet of paper stamped with the county seal. "Mr. Ellison, Mrs. Ellison, Miss Ellison, this is the official no contact order. You are prohibited from any form of contact or approach within 300 feet. Violations will result in arrest." He handed the paper to Mark. My stepfather reached for it with a trembling hand, the first sign of weakness I had seen in him since I was 12. And that was when I spoke. I stepped closer just enough to make sure they heard me clearly. "You will never touch my daughter again." My voice did not shake. It did not rise. It did not soften. It simply landed in the air like a verdict. My mother sobbed harder, the sound breaking from her chest like something she could not control. Brianna's eyes widened in disbelief, like she still thought life worked in the way it used to, where she could hurt others without consequence. And Mark, for the first time since I had known him, looked unsteady, like someone who had spent his whole life towering over others only to realize the ground beneath him was cracking. He opened his mouth to speak, maybe to argue, maybe to demand, maybe to plead, but whatever words he planned to use withered under the weight of the uniformed soldiers standing behind me. Lowell's voice cut through the silence. "Captain Hale, you are clear to depart." I adjusted the strap of Lily's bag on my shoulder, turned toward the door, and walked out of the house without a single backward glance. Not to my mother, not to Brianna, not to the man who had once convinced me I owed him obedience. The cold air outside felt like a clean beginning. I walked down the steps, slow, steady, deliberate, each step shedding another layer of the life I had been forced to survive. Behind me, I heard my mother cry my name once as if that single word could erase years of neglect, but her voice was swallowed by the wind. I did not turn. I reached the car, opened the back seat, placed Lily's bag gently inside, and closed the door. Maria touched my elbow softly. "You did the right thing." I nodded, but I kept my eyes on the road ahead. For the first time in my life, the path forward belonged entirely to me. No weight dragging at my ankles, no voice telling me to be smaller, no fear controlling my breath. And as the MPs escorted me out of the driveway, blocking the house from view, I whispered something to myself, something only I needed to hear. It is done. And I never looked back. Long-term consequences do not arrive like storms. They do not roar in or shake the walls or announce themselves with dramatic thunder. They arrive quietly, slowly, like a winter that settles over everything. So gradually, you do not notice the temperature dropping until you see frost on the windows. Hell. That is how the downfall of my family unfolded. Quiet, steady, inevitable. And the first to fall was Mark. His job as a construction foreman had always been tied to two things: the reputation he built through charm and the illusion of authority he carried into every space he entered. He liked walking onto a job site as if he owned the ground under the workers' boots. He barked orders, he strutted, he made crude jokes, he carried himself like a man who could do no wrong. But construction companies in Cumberland County are small communities. People hear things, they talk. And once the MP report reached the sheriff's office and the protective order was logged into public record, word began to spread in the same quiet, efficient way it always does in small towns. One morning, his supervisor called him into the office. Mark expected another routine meeting. Instead, he was handed a suspension notice pending investigation. He argued, he ranted, he accused them of overreacting. But the supervisor remained calm. "There is nothing to discuss. You endangered a child. We cannot have that associated with our company." For a man like Mark, image was everything. When the company posted an internal memo acknowledging his suspension for violation of safety and conduct standards, his reputation collapsed faster than the plywood scaffolding he used to brag he could build in his sleep. Workers avoided him. Friends distanced themselves. The company quietly replaced him within a week. By the end of the month, he was fired. Not with ceremony, not with confrontation. Just a simple administrative decision backed by a paper trail he could not charm his way out of. That was the beginning of his unraveling. The second person to fall was Brianna. For years, she lived off unearned confidence, the kind gifted to her by parents who told her she could do no wrong. She strutted through community college hallways like she was auditioning for a reality show. People tolerated her because of her looks, her loud laugh, her parties, her belief that the world bent around her comfort. But college campuses react faster to verified danger than most institutions. When the administration received notice of a formal CPS investigation naming Brianna as the primary aggressor who pushed a minor into deep water, they could not ignore it. The dean called her in for a conduct review. She tried to perform the same spoiled indignation she always used at home. She blamed me. She said it was not her fault, that it was a misunderstanding. But the dean had read the MP report. He had read the CPS documentation. He had seen the audio transcript, and more importantly, witnesses' young cousins had already given statements confirming she pushed Lily intentionally. She was placed on immediate suspension from all on-campus activities. Her scholarship, which had been shaky to begin with, was revoked within 2 weeks. Friends who once flocked to her Instagram-styled parties stopped replying. She became background noise in the very social circles she used to command. The attention she once weaponized turned to silence, and in that silence, her social standing dissolved. Then there was my mother, Sandra. Her consequences were not loud either. They came through doors quietly closing one by one. The church in Spring Lake had always been her stage. She volunteered at community dinners, hosted women's groups, made sure everyone saw her as the compassionate mother with the perfect family. But churches care about children, more than appearances, more than adult reputations. When Pastor Grant learned about the investigation and saw the documented evidence showing she stood by as Lily struggled for air, the board made the decision to remove her from every volunteer position. Not suspended. Removed. Permanently. The next Sunday, she arrived dressed in her usual polished way, expecting sympathy or confusion, or at least space to control the narrative. Instead, she was met with polite distance. People nodded but did not linger. Women she used to gossip with avoided eye contact. Parents with children subtly shifted them away. Not one person asked her to return to any youth events. Not one person asked her to serve. The church did not shame her. They simply stepped back and shut the door. For a woman who lived off the approval of her social circles, losing that quiet acceptance was worse than any public condemnation. She tried joining a women's group at another church in town. Within 2 meetings, the leader gently informed her they were not taking new volunteers at this time. She joined a charity group. They declined her application after a routine check revealed the ongoing investigation. Everywhere she turned, the same thing happened: polite distance. Doors shut, her world shrank. And then the financial strain began to settle in. With Mark out of work and Brianna losing her scholarship bills piled up, the mortgage on their house in Spring Lake fell behind. My mother called relatives for help, but extended family had already distanced themselves after the Family Day reveal. No one wanted to be tied to them publicly or privately. Even neighborhoods have long memories. The families on their street stopped inviting them to barbecues. Children were instructed to avoid the Ellison house. The PTA group my mother loved so much removed her from their mailing list without explanation. She tried to play the victim, telling people she was being unfairly targeted, but in small communities, truth spreads even faster than lies. And the truth was they were dangerous. They were careless. They endangered a child. And people protect children. That is when the evaporation of privilege began, a phenomenon I had never witnessed so clearly before, a slow ghosting of power, a shrinking of influence, a fading of the social advantages they once used as shields. No dramatic cancellations, no viral posts, just consequence by absence, privilege evaporating like steam, leaving cold air behind. Meanwhile, Lily and I rebuilt our lives, quietly, safely. The more stable I became, the more unstable they became. The more structure I built, the more their lives fell apart. They tried once to file a complaint against the protective order, claiming it was harsh. The judge denied it within hours, citing the evidence and severity of the incident. They attempted to call one of my old high school teachers to vouch for their character. She refused. They tried reaching out to 2 of my mother's cousins. Both declined involvement, saying, "We are staying out of this." Even the pastor at their old church limited his words to polite neutrality when others asked. The truth had become something they could not outrun. They became isolated not because people hated them, but because people no longer trusted them. They no longer held influence. They no longer commanded respect. And as weeks turned to months, the distance grew wider. I heard through a neighbor that Mark had started picking up odd handyman jobs for cash. No one wanted to hire him officially. Liability, reputation risk. He worked alone, avoiding eye contact, a man who once called himself a king of his household, now humbled by the absence of a kingdom. Brianna stopped posting on social media entirely. Her friends had moved on. The parties ended. The invitations ended. Her world shrank to the confines of the same house she once used as a throne. My mother rarely left the house except for groceries. Even then, people whispered behind her, not cruelly, not vindictively, just with caution. She had gone from respected church volunteer to a woman parents kept their children away from. I never rejoiced in their suffering. I did not need revenge through spectacle. I did not want dramatic collapse. What I wanted was safety, and safety requires accountability. The world delivered that accountability for me, slowly, quietly, completely. And as their privileges dissolved, something remarkable happened. I did not feel guilty. I did not feel conflicted. I did not feel the old instincts to rescue them from consequences of their own choices. I felt free. Their downfall was not my victory. My victory was the life I built without them. A life where my daughter sleeps peacefully. A life where my home is safe. A life where my uniform is not weighed down by the ghosts of the past. Their consequences belong to them. My freedom belongs to me. And for the first time in my life, that balance felt exactly right. Peace does not arrive like a trumpet or a marching band or some grand announcement from the sky. It arrives slowly, softly, like the way morning light creeps across a quiet kitchen floor when no one else is awake yet. That is how peace entered my life and my daughter's life in the months after the court order, not in dramatic waves, but in small, everyday moments that rebuilt us piece by piece. The first sign was in the pool at the YMCA. I sat on the bleachers, the air warm and humid, the scent of chlorine familiar now instead of frightening. Margaret, the instructor, stood waist deep in the water holding a floating bar as Lily kicked her legs. Her strokes were awkward at first, then more controlled, then suddenly confident. When she pushed off the wall and swam 3 full meters on her own, she lifted her head out of the water and looked for me immediately. Her eyes wide as if she herself could not believe it. I stood and clapped quietly, my chest tight, my eyes burning with pride. She waved both hands in the air and shouted, "Mommy, I can do it!" And she could. Not because she forgot what happened, but because she survived it and learned to move through the water with strength that belonged entirely to her. After lessons, she walked beside me in her little towel, humming to herself a faint tune I had not heard in months. Her confidence was returning. Her joy was returning. Her childhood was returning. We started building rituals together, a mother-daughter routine that belonged to no one else. Sunday mornings became pancake day. Friday evenings became movie and blanket night. On Saturdays, we explored new places around North Carolina parks and lakes and trails I had never taken time to visit before because my life had once been filled with survival, not exploration. One afternoon, we packed a picnic basket and drove out to Carolina Lake. The sky was a soft blue, brushed with high, thin clouds, and the water shimmered like glass under the sun. Lily wore her favorite yellow dress and carried her tiny binoculars she bought from the dollar aisle 3 weeks earlier, insisting she needed them for nature research. We walked along the lakeside trail, hand in hand, the leaves rustling above us like whispers of a world finally at peace. When we reached a stretch of grass that dipped toward the water, we spread out our blanket. Lily munched on peanut butter sandwiches while I leaned back on my elbows, feeling the breeze move through my hair. For the first time in a long time, my mind was quiet. No sense of danger, no old fear tugging at my ribs, no hypervigilance scanning for threats. Just calm. Lily set down her sandwich and crawled into my lap, resting her warm head against my chest. After a moment, she whispered, "Mommy, can I tell you something?" I brushed her hair back gently. "Of course, baby." She lifted her face toward mine, her eyes full of a tenderness that squeezed my heart. "I am not scared of water anymore." I smiled slowly, letting that truth wash through me. "I know, sweetheart." And then she added something that made my breath catch. "I am not scared of them anymore either." The world stilled for a moment. I kissed the top of her head and held her for a long time, my arms wrapped around her like the safest place on earth. After a while, she curled up beside me, drawing patterns in the blanket with her little fingers. I turned toward her and said the words she deserved to carry for the rest of her life. "You are not weak. You survived." She looked up at me with a soft smile, one full of quiet triumph. And in that moment, I realized something I had never fully understood before. Surviving is its own kind of strength, and rebuilding is its own kind of victory. As summer turned into early fall, our lives settled into a rhythm that felt gentle and sturdy. My unit continued to support me, offering flexibility when I needed to attend therapy appointments or school meetings. Soldiers I mentored began thriving in their roles, and each time one of them passed a qualification test or earned a new stripe. They came to me first with their news. "Captain Hale, you taught me resilience." "Captain Hale, thanks for listening." "Captain Hale, I did it." And every time they left my office, I felt something inside me expand, a sense of purpose I had never known inside my family's walls. Lily's school placed her in a small reading group where she blossomed. Her teacher told me she was kind, patient, and helpful to other kids. Words that reminded me she had survived cruelty without letting it harden her heart. And I kept healing too. Some nights I lit a candle in the living room and let the soft glow fill the quiet space while I read a book or folded laundry or simply breathed in the stillness. No yelling, no footsteps to fear, no tension pressing against my skin. The house felt warm in a way I had never felt growing up. A warmth that came not from temperature but from freedom. My mother never called again. My stepfather never approached again. Brianna never tried contacting me. The protective order held firm, and the world they once dominated receded further and further from mine, until their existence felt like a distant echo of a life I no longer belonged to. And I did not miss them. I did not wish things had turned out differently. I did not wonder what might have happened if I had forgiven them. Some doors stay closed because opening them again only lets the darkness back in. One quiet evening in October, Lily and I stood on our small porch watching fireflies blink across the yard, their lights flickering like tiny stars drifting close to earth. She leaned against my side, and I wrapped an arm around her, feeling her small chest rise and fall peacefully. I realized then that this was rebirth. Not a dramatic moment, not a sudden transformation, but 1,000 small safe seconds strung together. Seconds where fear no longer controlled us. Seconds where love had room to breathe. Seconds where my daughter could grow without shadows hovering over her. Seconds where I could exist without bracing for pain. Healing had taken months, but peace had taken even longer, because peace is something you must choose every day, not something you receive automatically. And I chose it. For me. For Lily. For the future I wanted her to stand in without carrying the weight of the past on her shoulders. As the last traces of sunlight faded over Carolina Lake, I whispered to myself a truth I had earned through every fight, every tear, every small victory along the way. Some justice is silent, some victories are quiet, but they last, and this one would, forever. Before bedtime, as Lily brushed her teeth, she looked at me through the mirror foam on her lips and asked, "Mommy, are we safe forever now?" I knelt beside her and kissed her cheek. "As long as I breathe, we are safe." She smiled and finished brushing, humming softly. Once she was tucked in and asleep, I stood in the doorway of her room for a long moment, her nightlight casting a soft glow across her blankets. Her little hands curled at her sides, her breathing calm and steady like a promise that peace could grow even from the darkest soil. And as I turned off the hallway light and headed to my room, I felt gratitude settle deep inside me like a new heartbeat, steady and sure. Because I had built this life, I had protected it, and nothing would ever take it from us again. If you made it this far with me, thank you for listening. And I wonder something truly. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done for your child? A full year can pass quietly without you noticing the way healing changes your posture, your voice, the way you carry yourself, the way you step into rooms without scanning them for danger. That is what the months after the court order felt like for me. Not dramatic, not loud, not triumphant in the Hollywood sense, but steady, grounded, and deeply peaceful. It was around late spring when I sat in my office at battalion headquarters reviewing logistics projections for the next quarter, sipping lukewarm coffee with my boots propped on the second chair when Lieutenant Colonel Abrams walked in. He had that same unreadable expression he always wore when something official and important was about to be said. "Captain Hale," he began, closing the door behind him. I looked up expecting another supply briefing or a training schedule adjustment. Instead, he handed me a sealed envelope with the Army Human Resources Command header printed sharply across the top. "Congratulations," he said, allowing a rare smile to break across his face. "You have been selected for promotion to Major." The room felt still for a long second, like time itself paused. Major. Not just a rank, not just a title. A milestone I had dreamed of reaching when I was 19 and still shaking from the choice to leave home. When I finally opened the envelope, my hands were steady. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet. "Thank you, sir." He nodded and added, "You earned every bit of this." That sentence stayed with me long after he left. I earned this. Not because of where I came from, not because of what I survived, but because of who I became in spite of it. When I told Lily that evening, she jumped into my arms so fast she nearly knocked both of us over. "Mommy is going to be a major. That means I have to salute you." I laughed, something I was doing more freely these days. "No, baby, you never have to salute me." She scrunched her nose and crossed her arms with the seriousness only a 7-year-old can muster. "I want to salute you anyway. You are my hero. Healing is not one moment. It is thousands of small ones. That was one of them." Meanwhile, Lily's world kept expanding in the ways I once feared she would never get to experience. Her swim instructor, Margaret, recommended her for a beginner children's swim team after noticing her confidence and strength in the water. I watched Lily at her first practice wearing a blue swimsuit with little white stars on it, her legs kicking through the pool like she had never once been afraid. Each lap she swam with more determination than the one before. When she reached the end and lifted her head out of the water, she grinned at me with that gap-toothed smile that always melts my heart. Her coach told me afterward, "She's got grit. Kids like her go far." I knew that already. The child they once called weak was now strong enough to glide through deep water with effortless control. The girl someone once tried to drown now owned the water, not through forgetting, but through overcoming. Our home became a haven in ways I once never believed possible. The porch light glowed warmly in the evenings. The refrigerator was covered in Lily's drawings, swim meet schedules, and the letter from her teacher praising her for helping a classmate who was struggling. I kept the protective order in a locked drawer, not because I feared it expiring, but because I wanted the reminder that safety is something I fought for and won. As for my family, or rather the people who once held that title, they faded from our world like shadows retreating at sunrise. Not with explosions, not with dramatic confrontations, but through absence. A total, quiet erasure. They stopped calling. They stopped showing up. They stopped trying to insert themselves back into our lives once they realized the law and the Army and my own resolve would not bend again. Sometimes I would hear distant updates through neighbors or acquaintances, small pieces of information that drifted my way without me asking. Mark picked up occasional odd jobs but never regained steady work. Brianna was rumored to have dropped out of community college and picked up a retail job but could not hold it. My mother rarely left the house anymore, but none of this brought me satisfaction. Their downfall was never supposed to be my victory. My victory was the silence where their voices used to be. My freedom was the space their chaos used to occupy. My peace was the absence of their presence. Early one morning, as Lily and I walked near the lake for our weekend ritual, the light filtered softly through the trees, creating golden reflections across the water. Lily spotted a small turtle near the shoreline and crouched down beside it, whispering softly so she would not scare it. I watched her small body silhouetted by the rising sun, her hair gently moving with the breeze, her eyes curious and calm. Calm. A word that once felt foreign to me. She looked back at me and said, "Mommy, the water looks like it is breathing." I knelt beside her. "It does, baby. Sometimes it does." She reached out and slipped her hand into mine. "Are we going to be okay forever?" I squeezed her fingers gently. Yes, sweetheart, because we built a life where we are safe. She nodded with a seriousness only a young child can hold. We walked back to the picnic blanket I had laid out earlier, the two of us wrapped in the quiet warmth of a morning that belonged only to us. As Lily ate her strawberries and scribbled in her notebook, drawing little waves and turtles and sunshine, I looked out across the lake and felt something I had chased for most of my life finally settle deep inside my bones. Peace. Not borrowed peace. Not fragile peace. Not temporary peace. Real peace. Earned peace. Peace built from courage boundaries and the law finally doing what it should have done from the start, protect the innocent instead of the people who harmed them. And the truth is this peace came not from running away from the past, but from facing it and refusing to let it shape our future. Lily finished her strawberries and scooted closer to me, leaning her head against my arm. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead and whispered the words that had become our quiet anthem. You are not weak. You survived. She smiled softly and whispered back. And you survived too, Mommy. And she was right. We both did. Some justice is silent. Some victories are quiet, but they last. Ours will. If you stayed with me through this whole journey, thank you truly. Now, I want to ask you something as a mother, as a soldier, and as someone who fought hard for the life we have today. Where are you watching from, and what would you have done for your child? When I look back on everything that has happened this past year, from the moment my daughter disappeared beneath the muddy water behind the barracks to the day she took her first confident stroke across the pool at the YMCA, I realize how many chapters of my life were written without my consent. Some chapters were shaped by fear, some by silence, some by survival. But these later chapters, the ones you have just walked through with me, page by page, breath by breath, were written with intention and courage, in the slow, steady rebuilding of a life that once felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And now, as I sit at my small dining table with a candle flickering softly beside me and Lily asleep upstairs after another long afternoon of swim practice and schoolwork, I feel something I never thought I would feel with this level of certainty. Gratitude, not for the pain, not for the trauma, but for the strength that rose from it. For the people who stepped in when others stepped out. For the systems that finally worked the way they were meant to work. For the chance to tell my story my way. For the chance to live a life my daughter can grow in safely, without fear that someone will take her joy or her innocence or her breath from her ever again. There is something about sitting in the quiet of your own home that makes reflections rise to the surface. Maybe it is the low hum of the air conditioner. Maybe it is the rhythmic ticking of the clock on the counter. Maybe it is just the simple truth that peace creates space for thoughts that used to hide in the corners of a noisy mind. I think of the soldiers in my unit who sat in folding chairs listening to me talk about resilience and boundaries and the courage to walk away from people who refuse to treat you with decency. I think of the young private who told me, "Ma'am, I would follow you anywhere." I think of the older sergeant who said, "You are the kind of leader soldiers remember years later." And I think of how strange it still feels sometimes to be looked at with respect instead of dismissal, to be seen as a leader instead of a burden, to be trusted instead of doubted. That shift did not come from rank or training or position. It came from surviving something dark and choosing not to let the darkness pass on to the next generation. It came from choosing to make my daughter's life different from the one I grew up in. Safer, calmer, kinder. There are days when I still struggle with memories. Trauma is not a switch you turn off. It is a door you keep choosing not to reopen. But those days are fewer now, smaller, quieter. Sometimes I remember the sound of the water splashing. Sometimes I remember the feeling of Mark's hand digging into my shoulder, holding me back as my daughter fought for breath. Sometimes I remember the coldness in Brianna's voice when she said, "If she is weak, she will not survive." And sometimes I remember the silent stillness that came over me when I realized I was going to break every chain they had wrapped around me to save the child they thought they could destroy. But the memories do not drown me anymore. They do not control my sleep or my breath or my heartbeat. They simply exist like old scars, reminders of chapters survived, not chapters still being lived. The present is different. The present belongs to me and to Lily and to the life we are building together without interference from people who once believed they could dictate our worth. Sometimes Lily asks me questions while she colors at the kitchen table, questions that strike deeper than she realizes. Mommy, why did they not love us the right way? Mommy, why did they say mean things? Mommy, why did they hurt us? Mommy, why did they not help me? I always answer her gently because she deserves the truth, but she also deserves childhood innocence. Some people do not know how to love baby. Some people think love is control. Some people confuse power with care. But you and I, we know better. We know love is safety. We know love is kindness. We know love never hurts on purpose. And every time I tell her that, I remind myself too. I spent years thinking family was something you tolerated no matter what the cost. That blood was thicker than pain. That leaving made you ungrateful. But I know now that family is not built from blood. Family is built from protection, dignity, honesty, and the courage to stand against cruelty, even when cruelty comes from the people who raised you. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. The consequences my mother, stepfather, and stepsister faced were not created by me. They were created by them. Their actions, their choices, their cruelty. People often believe justice requires noise, public shaming, viral posts, crowds pointing fingers. But I learned something different. Justice does not always need an audience. Sometimes justice is paperwork. Sometimes justice is boundaries. Sometimes justice is the sound of a courtroom door closing. And sometimes justice is the simple, quiet fact that the people who once hurt you no longer have access to you, no longer have power over you, no longer get to shape your future. When I walk through my home now, I notice small things that symbolize how far we have come. Lily's swim trophies on the bookshelf, my major select certificate framed beside the living room lamp, a refrigerator covered in drawings of sunshine and turtles and smiling stick figure families made of two people, one tall, one small, hand in hand, always happy. There is no third figure, no fourth, just us. And that is exactly how it should be. On weekends, when we visit Carolina Lake and spread out our picnic blanket near the water's edge, I sometimes watch Lily as she explores the shoreline, collecting shells or skipping stones, or dipping her feet into the cool water with no fear left in her. She no longer flinches. She no longer looks over her shoulder. She no longer shrinks into herself. She laughs freely again. The sound of her laughter is the greatest victory of all. Sometimes I think about the girl I used to be, the teenager who enlisted to escape a house filled with anger and manipulation, the young mother who moved through the world trying to protect her child from people who pretended to love her while tearing her down. I think about how many nights I cried quietly in the dark, preparing myself for the next morning, the next insult, the next guilt trip, the next battle. And then I look at who I am now: a leader, a survivor, a major select, a mother whose daughter is thriving, a woman who found peace not because life suddenly became easier, but because she fought for it with everything she had. Healing is not a destination. Healing is a path, a long one, a winding one, but one worth walking. And though the path behind me was filled with shadows, the path ahead glows with something beautiful. Possibility, freedom, future. I am grateful you walked this journey with me, truly. Whether you know someone who lived a life like mine, whether you lived one yourself, whether you faced injustice or heartbreak or toxic family ties, whether you are fighting your own quiet battles or healing from wounds no one else sees, I want you to know something. You are not alone. You are not weak. You are not defined by what was done to you. You are defined by what you choose next. And I hope you choose peace. I hope you choose boundaries. I hope you choose yourself. And now, as I close this final chapter of our story together, I want to ask you something from my heart to yours. If this story connected with you, tell me where you're listening from. And tell me, what does family mean to you now?